Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to day 2 of Authors and Innovators. I'm Larry Gennari from Gennari Aronson. We're an entrepreneurial law firm serving growth companies and the entrepreneurs, innovators, and investors that drive them. If you're joining Authors and Innovators for the first time or for the first time since last year, well, welcome back. As you know, Authors and Innovators is a free community-based event dedicated to and built on the premise that great ideas drive business. We have terrific authors, we have terrific innovators that we're going to be meeting today, and of course a terrific interview with Guy Raz. I want to start by thanking a few folks, most importantly our wonderful host, Babson College. So many of you know they are one of the nation's leading programs in entrepreneurial thinking, and it's been a launching pad for so many change makers, which ties into our theme about change this year, and our theme for the event, which change makers, the future is now. Debbie Kleiman is with me. Debbie is director of the Blank Center for Entrepreneurship at Babson College. And Debbie, you've been shoveling this morning.
Yeah, hard to believe we're snowing today and it's sticking. But thanks, Larry. Obviously everything that we talked about yesterday and all the stuff we have on tap today in terms of our authors and the business ideas that they write about, all in Babson's wheelhouse, all so relevant to our students and our lifelong learners all around the world. So Babson is so happy to partner with you on this wonderful event, and all the learning that happened yesterday is going to be augmented by even more today. So we're excited. It should be great.
Thank you, Debbie. And thank you to Travis Gray and the entire Babson IT team. We're very proud of you, and thank you for keeping us on track. I want to thank our sponsors, Brown & Brown Insurance, Mike Ross and his team, such entrepreneurial folks, The Buzz, Innovation Women, Boston Business Journal, and Boston Inno. With that, let's get started. Debbie, you and I have been having such fun with this event. Now it's time to talk about your book, and one of my favorites, First Pitch. So for the folks who are going to be watching this, I really want you to pay close attention. I'm using this book in my classes at Boston College Law School for my class on entrepreneurship. It is perfect in so many ways. So I'm delighted that Debbie and I will have a chance to talk about it. We've introduced Debbie already, but for those folks who are joining us for this segment, Debbie Kleiman is the Executive Director of the Blank Center for Entrepreneurship at Babson College, our host. Debbie works with students, alumni, and faculty, as well as the broader entrepreneurial community, to accelerate the practice of entrepreneurship. Debbie's unique. Before coming to Babson, she was a managing director and executive VP at Havas Media in Boston. She's also had a variety of technology and marketing positions at various venture-backed and other companies, and she has spent many years as a mentor, advisor, and in some cases as an investor. Earlier in her career, she had field marketing leadership roles at Procter & Gamble, Welch's, Coca-Cola, all of the brand names. Just delighted that Debbie is both in her position helping entrepreneurs become successful, but also writing this book. So, First Pitch, I have, as I've told people in my column in the BBJ and in other places, First Pitch is a must-read. It is a really easy-to-follow framework. It has stories and best practices, analyzing lots and lots of pitches. So let's talk about it. Debbie, given the title, people would assume that this book, First Pitch, Winning Money, Mentors, and More for Your Startup, is just about pitching investors for money. It's not.
It's not.
Talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny. People have been like, oh, you wrote a book on pitching. I'm like, well, yes and no. Because the reality is that it's about the entire pitching process, soup to nuts. And sure, the pitch deck and what you say in that pitch is important and is covered in depth in the book. But there's this whole other set of things that happen in the pitch process itself. And those things are really about communication and relationship building. And so what I really think I wrote is a book about communication and relationship building that allows you to make a great pitch and develop the relationships you need to build a startup. Because for most entrepreneurs, it's not just about getting money, as my subtitle indicates. It's also involving advisors, PR, influencers, early customers. All these folks can have a hand in your startup if your pitch is compelling enough to get them to care and to get them to lean in and want to help you.
That's one of the reasons that I thought this book was so appropriate and so foundational for entrepreneurs. As you and I talked about in the past, Debbie, so many entrepreneurs have this bias for action. They just want to do it. But you talk about in the book taking a step back even before you write the pitch deck and coming up with some basic essential tactics. What are some of those? I want people to read the book, but what are some of the essentials that you would convey to our entrepreneurs who are listening before they even start a pitch deck?
Well, I think one of the best things you can do as a entrepreneur before you start putting your pitch deck together is really to understand, like, what's your story? Storytelling plays a really huge role in effective pitches. And there's a reason why, because storytelling creates an emotional connection with your audience, which is really important because that will allow people to lean in and really want to be part of your journey. And storytelling also makes things memorable. And being memorable is also another objective of pitching, because you want the person who heard your pitch to remember you and think about you long after the pitch is over, so that they might end up helping you in some other way or find connections for you or provide some kind of help for you. And you also want them to tell their friends about you and to tell other people about you, because that also creates this wonderful ripple effect of people talking about you. And certainly as a startup, an early stage startup getting underway, the more momentum you can have by people wanting to help and people caring about what happens to this startup and wanting to be involved, the better. So I talk a lot about storytelling, and it's interesting because in my background as a marketer, this is so true. As a marketer, we're trying to get people to persuade them to do something. We're trying to get them to change their behavior. And as a marketer for most of my career, that is how I've approached a lot of the things that I've done in terms of trying to make an emotional connection with my audience. It's based on those rules of marketing that I learned so well. Well, the same is true with pitching, right? You're trying to persuade people to give you something of value, whether it's their time or their money or their connections. So that same element of persuasion and getting them to lean in really applies here. And that's what storytelling does for you. So storytelling is just a wonderful way to engage people's brains. In fact, the brain science tells us that our brains love stories. They remember stories. And as we all know, storytelling has been around since the beginning of time. And people learn really well when you tell them stories. In fact, our brains are wired to take in stories. So lots of great reasons to make sure that you have a story to tell. And the story that you're going to tell is really your why about your company. And that in and of itself takes some deep thought and some insight into the problem you're trying to solve and why you, beyond anybody else in the world, can solve that problem best, and why you are the one that's going to make it happen right now. So there's a lot of soul searching, a lot of, also looking outward to sort of see what's happening in this moment in time that makes it the right time for your startup to happen, and then to develop sort of an origin story around that connects with your audience in an emotional way and gets them to feel something.
Debbie, you've talked to so many Babson entrepreneurs and so many entrepreneurs in general. Are there one or two stories, and you talk about some of them in the book, that really got this right? In other words, for our entrepreneurs who are listening and thinking, well, what's my story? I'm just another software company. I'm another technology. There's got to be something. What are the kind of things that you would say to them, to entrepreneurs, to dig deeper? Tell a story that only you can tell. What are those kind of things, even if you're telling by example a couple that you thought really did a great job doing that?
Yeah, that's a great point, Larry, because 99% of the time when an entrepreneur sort of tells me their story or the story that they're working on for their pitch, they can always go deeper. They have not gone deep enough. I can always say to them, go deeper. Why, and ask them several times to just really dig into that initial path that they've taken, because they've really stayed up here when they really need to dig in deep, and really make it emotional and make people feel something about it. So There are a couple pitches that really stand out to me that did a great job of this. You know, my all-time favorite is probably Emily Levy, who's in the book. Her story's in the book, and her pitch, you know, continues to resonate. I use it in my class all the time because it's such a great example of taking something that affected her personally. She has chronic Lyme disease and had to have a PICC line installed in her arm in order to get her treatments. And as a college freshman, she was walking around Babson with a PICC line in her arm, and she felt like she was a walking disease. And nobody wants to feel like that, especially not a teenage girl, you know, off to college for the first time. And so she tells the story about, like, you know, feeling self-conscious about flirting with the cute hockey player in her 8 a.m. class. And, you know, you don't have to be a teenage girl to understand that dynamic and to really feel something about that. Right. And so she makes that problem come to life, that problem of feeling like a walking disease, that problem of feeling like a patient. And people who have chronic illnesses feel so badly about this. This takes away their confidence. It takes away their happiness. And her products are about, it's adaptive wear. And so her products are about things you can wear to cover up, you know, medical devices of all different kinds. And so her message and her thing that she's solving for is empowerment. It has nothing to do with, you know, that it's an amazing, beautifully designed piece of fabric that you put on your arm. She is giving you empowerment, and she's selling you that confidence to be able to flirt with that hockey player in your 8 a.m. class, or whatever that version of that may be for someone. So I love her pitch because it is such a personal story about her and how she felt, but she taps into something that's so universal that everybody from anywhere can truly understand why this problem needs to be solved and why her solution to it is so unique and can only be delivered by her.
A great example of digging deeper. Debbie, what do you tell entrepreneurs who might have the opposite concern, which is, I have this allergy and I've solved it with this particular product, and therefore everyone should want to buy this product? In other words, taking it and forcing people to sort of empathize and understand that this needs to be more universal. How do you tell them to tell that story?
Well, I think a lot of it comes from putting yourself in the customer's shoes and really understanding how to talk about it in a way, not that you're familiar with necessarily, but in a way that, you know, that can be drawn in a universal way or tap into a certain emotion that we know everybody feels, regardless of their situation or circumstance. So, you know, I often tell my entrepreneurs at Babson to think about an emotion that you're trying to get people to feel like. Actually think about that emotion and build the story around that emotion versus building the story and hoping the emotion comes out the other side. So starting with the emotion you want them to feel about the problem you're solving.
And Debbie, how would you advise students and entrepreneurs who say, that sounds great, Debbie, but I'm pitching to different audiences. So if I'm pitching to angels, I want them to be excited about the idea, and maybe they're familiar with the area. They used to sell shoes, and mine is a footwear product, versus I'm dealing with a very straight-laced group of Harvard MBAs like you, and they only care about ROI, rewards, does this fit our... How do you tell someone to adjust their story depending on an audience, or should they?
Well, I definitely think they should. The best pitches are very much tailored to their audience. Again, back to lessons from the marketing world, you have to know your audience. You have to know your target market really, really well. So when you're getting prepared to be up in front of someone or engage one-on-one with an investor or an advisor who might not, you know, be the kind of person that you would imagine would want to hear a whole long drawn-out story, you do have to adjust, and you do have to make very conscious effort to make sure you're connecting with that person in that moment. So you're going to have many pitches, and you're going to tailor them every single time, as you should. But like sort of going, like if you think this person isn't, you know, someone who's going to respond to an emotional thing, you're probably wrong, because everybody has emotions. But the idea here is that the emotional response or the emotional connection you're trying to make with your audience is generally connected to your unique value proposition. as a company, in terms of your solution. So if your unique value proposition is the secret sauce, your magic that you do better than anyone else in the world, and it's tied very closely to your story and the emotional connection you're trying to make, then any type of investor is going to be interested in hearing that, because the unique value proposition is how you're going to win. And that is the thing that is going to make you, attractive to people to buy over anything else. So again, going back to your earlier question, there's a lot of work you need to do around how do you articulate your unique value proposition so it does connect to that emotion or that feeling that people are supposed to have when they hear about your product and they use your solution.
Debbie, what do you tell folks about the length of a pitch? And I know the answer generally depends, but I have a dear friend who's a minister who advises you don't save any souls after the first 5 minutes. So what do you tell folks about that in terms of, I get this great story, Debbie, you just have to hear the whole thing. What do you tell those very excited entrepreneurs when the thought balloon over your head is, oh boy, not every audience is going to buy this, and you've got to get them. What do you tell them about length?
Yeah, well, you've got about 90 seconds for people to decide whether or not they want to hear more from you. So usually about that first 90 seconds, most people have decided already if they want to hear more about you. And if they don't, they've kind of tuned out after that. So that first bit is super important to engage people and to get that hook into them so that they'll continue to lean forward and listen in. But actually, the whole goal of giving a pitch is to not be giving a pitch. In other words, the whole point of a pitch is to get somebody engaged in a conversation with you, typically, unless, of course, you're in a pitch competition. But if you're just giving your pitch to an investor or an advisor or someone you want to get involved in your business, ideally, it's going to move into a conversation where you can really dig into the details and follow the path that they want to go down, and really show them yourself as a thoughtful and an intentional entrepreneur. So, if it's a question of if you do have the flexibility around time and how much you present, I usually say, 8 to 10 minutes is probably more than enough for a formal pitch. But ideally, it's going to be 2 minutes and someone's going to ask you a question and interrupt you, and you're going to get started talking more in depth about the business and, put the pitch away.
Great question. So you're engaging. What a thoughtful way to think about it. So you're engaging in a conversation. Debbie, what do you tell folks about just that point that you made? I've got my story set. I've got my pitch set. Someone just interrupted me. How do you prepare those entrepreneurs? Do you just tell them, look, you're lucky if you get 90 seconds out before somebody starts to say, this is what I care about? And should the entrepreneur pivot or come back to? What do you advise them when they say, what do I do when I get interrupted?
Well, it's something you have to practice handling. You have to be good on your feet, and you don't get good on your feet by just magically waking up one day and you're good on your feet. It's something you really have to practice, and it's something that you really have to be challenged by in different situations so that it becomes very natural for you to switch gears if you have to. But what I generally say is if you're getting questions about something that you either can't answer or don't want to answer in that moment, find a way to answer a question you do want to answer in that moment and sort of move the conversation in the direction where you want to go. As the entrepreneur, you should try to keep control of the conversation. It's not that you're supposed to just, cede control to who you're speaking to in the sense that you don't get all the points out that you really want to get out. They may come out in a different order, but you still have a certain set of points you want to make. So make sure you're still controlling the conversation and you're still being intentional about how you're being perceived. But a lot of what goes into pitching, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is about this relationship building and this ability to connect with people, their motivations, their desires, their reasons for wanting to help you. And so a lot of that is just around trying to find that thing that really lights their fire and go there in the moment and be comfortable with that. But at the end of the day, they just want to know who you are, right? They want to see your authentic self. And the best way to show that is to be good on your feet and being open to listening to their feedback and their ideas and building on their ideas in the moment and just really, again, engaging in a dialogue that's open and interesting, that shows you as an entrepreneur to not be defensive. It shows you to be coachable, which is something that a lot of early stage investors care about because they're going to be spending a lot of time helping you. And so they want to make sure that there's a good relationship between you to get involved. It's sort of like, some people describe it as a marriage because you end up spending so much time together. Right. You better feel like you really want to, sit next to this person on a 10-hour plane flight and still have a good time.
Great advice about active listening. Debbie, this all sounds so complicated. If I'm an entrepreneur and I say, I've got so much that I'm trying to do, how much tech do I need to know? Shouldn't I just hire someone to do this pitch for me?
Oh my gosh, never hire someone to do your pitch for you. Although I have heard of people offering that service, and I don't understand why that exists. Because again, at the end of the day, they're trying to get to know who you are, what you're all about, what you care about. A VC friend of mine says that he doesn't even let the entrepreneur pitch in the beginning of their meeting. He sits that entrepreneur down and he asks them about their life and where they come from and what they're all about, trying to understand their values, and if they've got that it factor that can make their startup into a movement. They want to understand that before they get into the nuts and bolts of the startup. So it's really important that you're showing exactly who you are. You're not, putting on airs or being fake about anything or saying things that, are potentially untrue, and just being you and hoping that they can get excited and involved with what you care about too, by the way you present it and by the way that you tap into their emotions and desires and motivations.
And how much tech do I have to have, Debbie, if I'm not a person like you with extensive marketing background or really know how to do this, what do you tell entrepreneurs who just say, well, where do I start? I mean, certainly start with a good book. You've got some great tips in here, some references to some terrific resources. But how do they start if they've never really, in a meaningful way, put together a presentation before?
Yeah, well, the presentation or the deck itself is, one piece of it, and it has to be really good. Like, it can't be sloppy or have mistakes in it because it's a reflection on you. Everything that you present about yourself and your company in those moments are a reflection of you. So if your pitch deck has errors or it's sloppy or it's too crowded full of text, they're going to think you're too crowded in your brain to be focused on the main goal. They're going to think you make mistakes. They're going to think you're messy. So the deck really needs to be a reflection of you and the business that you're trying to talk about. So it should be beautiful. It should have an aesthetic that reflects the brand that you're trying to build. If it's a modern brand, have a very modern looking deck. If it's a family brand, have something that really reflects a family image. So it all comes down to, fonts and images and, being really deliberate about the way that you represent the business on paper, because that really reflects on you. And so you want that to do the talking in terms of, being aligned with who you are and what you're trying to say. But at the same time, the deck shouldn't say everything. So a presentation deck should have one idea per slide, not be crowded with text, and it should be there to support your talk track, not be your talk track.
I love that. Thank you so much for saying that, because how many meetings have you and I both been in where people are doing PowerPoints, they're reading you the slides. And the only thing you think as they're reading it is, there are 6 points on the slides. I can't wait till they get to number 6 so I can see what's on the next page. So how do you, when you tell entrepreneurs, that's such great advice. Say that again, Debbie, just to give some basic points about that PowerPoint, because it's so important for entrepreneurs who are thinking that. I want them to hear that because you emphasize it in the book. It's such a great point. Just if you were saying to someone just generally, how many slides, how many points per slide? How do I do this, Debbie? How do I put together a slide deck that is entertaining? Do I embed files and do videos? What do you think?
Well, I don't think you want to get too fancy because a lot of times your tech won't work in the moment or something will go wrong. So you want it to be, able to run in a lot of different scenarios. So you don't want to, I generally do a demo in a first pitch. I would probably do a demo in a second meeting where we can really dive in together and look at the product. But I would show screenshots if if your user experience is part of your unique value proposition, and you should be showing that. So the key is to make sure that you really understand your value proposition and it's threaded throughout the deck. You should have about 10 to 12 slides for an investor pitch and then an appendix. And in that appendix, you should have slides that support any questions you think you're going to get asked because you didn't cover that information in the main
Great
deck.
point.
Right? So when someone asks you a question in the Q&A part, you can say, yes, I've got that in the appendix. Let me bring that up. So you bring up the slide that supports your answer, and then you go into your answer. But what should be true in all cases is that the slide doesn't have everything on it to explain your answer. It's about your answer in the moment, you saying it. The slide, again, is just there to support it, what you're saying. You can, however, create what's called the leave behind deck if you want, and that's a completely separate deck that you don't present. It has more text on it. It has more explanation on it that you can then give to the person you present it to that they can share within their organization. Let's say their angel network or something, and they want to share the deck widely after the meeting. So it has a little bit more text in it, but it's not meant to be presented. It's meant to sort of back up and remind people what you were talking about.
Great tips. And Debbie, we're all pitching now in different times. When you started to write this book, we actually got together in person for meetings. What are you telling entrepreneurs about adjusting to this virtual environment and virtual pitches, Zoom calls? What should they be thinking about? What should they be doing differently now that the world, or as long as this world is different?
Yeah, it's so funny because I finished writing the book in February and it went off to press and to get finished and to be ready for an April launch. And then the pandemic happened. And so had I finished the book in March, I probably would have had a chapter on how to pitch online. And as a result of that, I've written several articles about how to pitch online because it is so important these days. You know, a lot of what's in the book are universal rules about pitching. And so it's still totally relevant. But pitching online comes with it a couple different things. We referenced tech earlier before. You know, tech becomes way more important in a pitch online because you've got to make sure you've got a good microphone, you've got a good camera, you might even have some lighting. It is not expensive to buy a ring light and put a ring light in front of you so that your face is being well lit while you're talking. Just little things to make you look good on camera can make a lot of difference into how the pitch is taken in and how it's perceived. I think the other thing that's really important is this idea of, you know, having to project energy through that tiny little lens now. You're not getting the feedback from the audience like you normally would. You're not seeing people shake their head and nod in agreement, or you're not seeing them become distracted. So you have to assume that every few seconds, like, you know, every 30 seconds or 40 seconds, you need to say or do something that's going to capture their attention back to the camera. So whether it's a hand gesture or a different type of emphasis and tone of voice, you have to assume that you need to keep bringing them back, getting them reinterested in what you're talking about, because you're not going to have those cues. And so you have to make assumptions around that. And it requires a lot more energy. You have to project more of yourself into the lens so that people can feel and care about that, about what you're saying. I counsel a lot of my entrepreneurs who are pitching online to actually create a deck that has more slides with less on it. So the idea is that when you're pitching online, you are changing the slide more often. Because again, that's another thing that might bring their eye back to your presentation if you switch the slide. So more slides, but less information than you would normally do in a pitch in person.
And Debbie, what do you say to teams that say, Debbie, ordinarily, we would do this pitch together. She's in that space. I'm here. What's your advice for teams that might want to be collaborating on pitches and how that might be different virtually versus in person? Actually, I love your input on both of those. How do teams think about pitching together? And how do teams think about pitching together virtually?
I like to think that it should be one person pitching throughout the whole time. I don't like the handoff in the middle of a pitch. But what I do love is when the team is there and can be present for the Q&A part of the pitch. So they can So what you would do as a team, if you're a team and you've got, a dynamite group of people you're working with, and they're really part of your competitive advantage, this team that you have. And often advisors and mentors and investors care a ton about the team, probably more so than anything else, because they know the product's going to change, but the team hopefully will not. So they care a ton about the team. And so they want to see the team. And what I would use the team for is that Q&A section, and then practice with your team, whether it's online or in person, who takes what questions. Figure out, like, if it's a marketing question, it's going to go to you, Larry. And if it's a P&L question, it's going to go to Dave. And if it's a question about how the product works, it's going to go to Mary. And so everybody kind of knows their role and which questions they field, so you don't talk over each other, and let their expertise shine in that Q&A section.
Yeah, and so important that at least they're there. And is that your advice if they're together virtually as well? You've got all these little heads in the Zoom window.
Yes, for sure. I think that it is the same thing. You want the team to shine, you want to feature the team, but it's really clunky to switch presenters in the middle. Hopefully you're not talking that long before it becomes a conversation anyway.
And any advice on, you talk a bit in the book about confronting bias. And I certainly in my career have seen it with some of my entrepreneurs from historically underrepresented groups. Female entrepreneurs have to do this differently. I don't want to give away the chapter because I think it's really thoughtful and well positioned in the book. What do you advise, Debbie, about confronting bias? I'm a woman entrepreneur and I'm sitting in a room, a sea of folks who just do not look like me with their arms like this. Yeah. Talk about how do you adjust your pitch? How do you think about that when you're confronting implicit or outright bias?
Yeah, the pitch environment in the entrepreneurship world is unfortunately full of bias, and it's just a state of the business that it is that way. And I'd like to believe that most of it is unconscious, and people don't realize that they're doing it. But it's a fact, it's here. So as an underrepresented entrepreneur, whether you're a woman or a person of color, you really do need to be prepared for that and to be prepared to encounter it. So the first thing you need to do is obviously find people to pitch to that are actually going to be aware of that and be conscious of the biases that might exist, and try to actively not, be biased in their opinion of you or their impression of you, and allow you to kind of show yourself to be the awesome entrepreneur that you are. But sometimes you just don't know, and it might happen in the middle, or it might happen in the Q&A section where somebody says something that is inherently biased, but they don't realize it. And what I tell entrepreneurs to do is employ a technique that I call spot it and switch it. And the idea is to get really good at spotting biased commentary or biased questions, and then switching the question to something that is about opportunity, about growth, about something that is bigger and more interesting and exciting than this very biased, risk-averse question they've just asked. So, if you're a mom and you have a business that is, really exciting, whether it's a tech business or a lingerie business, being a mom is an advantage. And so you need to show that when you get a question like, oh, well, you're a mom, can you really put all this energy and time into your business because you have a bunch of young kids? Well, actually, I see being a mom as an advantage, because I get more done before 8 a.m. than most people get done all day. Yeah. And I have the ability and the strength to make my children well cared for and kept, and my business well cared for and kept. I'm perfectly capable. And I think that it's actually an advantage because I'm bringing this perspective to the market that really needs it, for example. Or let's say you're building a company that's in a specialty marketplace, whether it's, products for skincare for Black women, and, you're presenting to a bunch of white investors. The idea there would be to sort of show that your unique perspective and insight is hugely valuable, that you can see things they can't see. And so you start to talk about opportunity and market size and how you're going to win anytime you get something that sort of seems biased. So it kind of relates back to what I said before. If you get a question asked that you don't want to answer, answer the question you do want to answer. And then, you know, showcase that your difference is actually an advantage, whatever that difference may be.
Such terrific hard-earned wisdom. Folks, the book is First Pitch, Winning Money, Mentors, and More for Your Startup. I hope you'll get a copy and enjoy it. I'm sorry that we're out of time, but the good news is Debbie will be here. I will be here for the rest of our presentation, and hope you enjoy the book, and we'll pick up a copy soon. Thank you very much, Debbie.
Thanks, Larry. This has been so fun.
And it is fun to talk about my book. I love it. Thank you, Larry.
A master class, Debbie. Master class in pitching. We are shamelessly pitching our independent bookstores and our authors. So I'm going to hold it up while you introduce what's next.
All right. And if you're looking for more resources about your pitch, my website, thefirstpitchbook.com, has a lot of good stuff on it. So next up is our next round of the Innovator Showcase. And so if you weren't with us yesterday, Larry described what our Innovator Showcase is all about. Normally, when this event is in person, we have 10 to 12 amazing innovators around the room who you can speak with and interact with and understand what they're working on. This year, obviously, since we're online, we had to figure out a different way to do it. So we invited 4 of our favorite innovators that were going to come and share their pitches with us today. So this is what's next. Please enjoy this version of Day 2 Innovator Showcase.
Hello, my name is Esther Wallace, founder and CEO of Playa Society, made for women who love to play. Girls drop out of sports during adolescence twice as often as boys because of a lack of representation for women's sports. But imagine if we all saw more examples of women who play. Imagine just how many more athletes like Serena Williams or Megan Rapinoe there could be. What if a brand could inspire a culture shift by doing the same for women's sports as Lululemon has done for yoga? Clothing is how we express our identities in society. Yet there isn't a brand that reflects the identity of women who play basketball, soccer, softball, and other competitive sports. Women who play sports tend to have a specific aesthetic: comfortable and casual, sporty and relaxed. Women's sportswear offers a redundant uniform of sports bras and leggings. So men's sportswear is often where female athletes find our favorite t-shirts, sweatpants, and shorts. Unfortunately, neither category captures the essence of female athlete culture. Playa Society does. We fill the gap with sportswear made for women who play sports. We create a sportswoman category with an athletic aesthetic and designs that unapologetically capture the essence of female athlete identity. Currently, we specialize in t-shirts that fuel the women's sports social movement, like the trademarked female athlete t-shirt that I'm wearing today. The women's sportswear market has grown at an average annual rate of 7%. But what is most impressive is the continued growth of the community of women who play sports. Research shows that 40% of athletes in the US are women. And since Title IX, girls and women's participation in high school and collegiate sports has increased nearly every year. There is a market opportunity for more diverse sportswear for women, and Playa Society stands out with designs inspired by competitive sports. Playa Society launched in 2018, selling primarily online, with additional sales through purchase orders with teams and organizations like the WNBA. We are profitable and currently expecting to exceed $200,000 in sales this year. I'm currently seeking funding to support product development and promotion. Product development is our growth strategy and the key to gaining market share. Playa Society must continue to design t-shirts that make an emotional connection with our audience, and then introduce sportswear essentials like sweatpants and shorts that help female athletes connect with their identity. Playa Society aims to create an essential item within every female athlete's wardrobe, like the t-shirt that she wears excessively, or the shorts that she can't live without. I didn't start playing basketball until I was 15. I couldn't imagine being an athlete before then simply because I wasn't exposed to women's sports. My story is just one example. that representation is really important because girls cannot become what they cannot see. I created Playa Society to change that narrative and to use sportswear as a platform to define female athlete culture, so that seeing women who play sports becomes as common as seeing women who do yoga, and so that t-shirts and sweatpants become as essential as sports bras and leggings. Thank you. My name is Esther Wallace. You can contact me at esther@playasociety.com.
Light me up, don't you stop, cast the night, it's on the line, show me how you get around.
I think my personality quiz was pretty accurate. It was just really cool to see how just from some seemingly random questions it put together like a whole career cluster for me.
College seems kind of scary to me. It kind of makes me feel kind of anxious. I do want to be successful and I do want to like do something with my life. As long as you have like an idea, you could just, do it.
I was kind of surprised about types of engineering jobs, like nanosystems engineer. I was really not expecting that, but I looked into it and it looked really interesting.
I'm Varda Halliday, the Vice President of Human Resources for American Student Assistance. It's nice to think that every kid has a North Star, a path that's born out of their passions and abilities, a plan after high school determined by them, not for them. But the truth is, this simply isn't the case for millions of students. Instead, they're being told to narrow in when they should be exploring wide. They feel unprepared and uncertain about the future, chasing opportunities that just don't fit, and running into dead ends. It doesn't have to be that way. We at American Student Assistance aspire to help students know themselves, know their options, and make informed decisions about their education and career goals. This will give students more freedom to explore, the means to experiment, and the support they need to pursue their dreams. We're bringing our help and ideas to classrooms, communities, Capitol Hill, and directly to kids. What I'm inspired by is this generation doing whatever it is that they want. They're change makers. We believe in a path for every student and a plan for every future. We won't stop until every student finds theirs.
Hi, my name is Veronica Berry, and I'm founder and CEO of TruDiary. We are a prenatal risk assessment and monitoring platform that detects early high-risk warning indicators in first trimester, allowing for timely interventions and reducing negative maternal health outcomes. So the problem is a lack of access to appropriate care, health information gaps, and poor engagement put women at an increased risk of negative maternal outcomes. And so we're impacting the 20 million women who live in maternal health deserts across the country. The reason this problem is near and dear to me is because when I became pregnant, I was looking forward to the experience. And I experienced traumatic pregnancy complications during my pregnancy, and it created a lot of uncertainty for me and my unborn child. Luckily for me, I delivered a healthy 8-pound baby boy, but this isn't the case for hundreds of thousands of women across the world and in the United States who die from pregnancy complications each year, and 2/3 of those deaths are preventable. So the market opportunity there for pregnancy complications, it's a $26 billion market. So there's a lot of work to be done. Again, we're impacting the 20 million women who live in maternal health deserts, and we're directly focused on the $300 million high-risk pregnancy market in South Georgia, where the average patient is 40 miles away from an OBGYN. And in some cases, there are only 2 OBGYNs per 10 county area. 79 out of 159 counties in the state of Georgia are without obstetrics clinics. So it's a huge problem. Why are we the team to work on it, and why now? Considering the state of where healthcare is, we are the team to bring this about. We have over 25 years of healthcare, population health, and development experience. I have over 15 years of healthcare in hospitals and pharma experience. My co-founder and COO, Tiffany Gray, has over 8 years of population health experience, and she works with the Department of Health of DC. So our revenue model, we are working with health systems who really want to close the gap when it comes to access to care and health information. So our business model is a per patient fee that's reimbursable through insurance, and a rev share model that we share with health systems, increasing revenues and partnering with them to do that. So where we are currently, we are working on our algorithm, and we are getting that data, that information from 3 years of pregnancy records through the University of Mississippi Medical Center, and that's how we're creating our algorithm currently. We're also working with the University of Mississippi Medical Center and clinics in South Georgia on a pilot opportunity where we will pilot up to 250 women that will take place in a study to see how our algorithms are helping detect these early risk pregnancy complications. Again, my name is Veronica Berry. I'm founder and CEO of TruDiary, and you can reach me at vberry@trudiary.com. Thank you.
In the past, there were only a few career options to choose from, and opportunities for education were limited. Now there are thousands of careers, tens of thousands of colleges, and eventually there will be millions of online courses. Schools, parents, and students are not equipped for this expansion of choice. How did we end up like this? In the EdTech career guidance space, most products remain focused on college planning or career exploration as an either-or proposition. A school counselor is supposed to help, but on average, there's only one counselor for every 491 students. The overburdened counselors focus on the 12th grade, leaving students in lower grades without crucial guidance. To fix this, we've created an interactive career encyclopedia that's fun, engaging, and motivates students to explore at least 30 careers, 15 courses, and 10 colleges. For schools and parents, we've built an easy-to-use dashboard to track the evolution of the students' interests, skills, and motivations over time. It's important to note that Dash Beyond does not tell the student what careers or education to pursue. That existential choice remains with the users. Instead, our personalized recommendation engine expands the realm of what a student thinks is possible, and then our algorithms show them how to make it possible. Our algorithms create Dash Beyond maps that recommend the school subjects, the skills, the online courses, the college classes, and the experience suggested for the student's chosen career path. These constantly updating algorithms and our kick-ass career documentary films are our biggest differentiators. We've created a cost-effective means of onboarding masses of students by partnering with schools to conduct free career exploration workshops, supplemented by a free trial of our platform, allowing students to explore up to 15 careers. Since August 15th, we've partnered with 10 schools and expect to be in 30 by the end of the year. We are now a revenue-generating business, with one of our pilot schools receiving enough student requests for full access to Dash Beyond, leading to the school purchasing 70 licenses at $50 per student. But not all schools are willing to pay for the platform. And in those situations, we're starting to see student demand resulting in parents purchasing premium accounts for their children at $100 per user. We are evolving Dash Beyond to be a micro-social network, almost like a junior LinkedIn, that helps students on all fronts, career and education, from exploring careers and courses to applying to colleges and online classes, and eventually garnering them internships and jobs. Our vision is to build a product that offers so much value and service to users that the United Nations declares it essential that Dash Beyond be offered as a basic human right. We want governments to declare the need for our product to become a public utility tool, as global and as accessible as the internet. If someone wants to work and is willing to put in the effort, if they're willing to study and grow, then there should be no confusion on how to achieve their career dreams because Dash Beyond exists. We're currently looking to raise $512,000. Thank you. My name is Akansh Potukuchi. You can contact me at akansh@dashbeyond.com, and you can visit our website at www.dashbeyond.com.
Wow. Always inspiring, Debbie. These so tied into our theme of change makers. And inspiring all of us. This is why we do Authors and Innovators. So I want to thank Playa Society, American Student Assistance, TruDiary, and Dash Beyond. And I hope that our viewers will take a look at the slide that's up there now and be in touch with them. You're going to be hearing a lot more from these folks very soon.
Impressive group. That was so fun. Loved it.
Doug Banks, the executive editor of the Boston Business Journal, is here. And once again, we are pressing him into service, and we're going to continue with our theme of change, making change and finding money. And so I know you're going to enjoy this terrific panel with some really thoughtful people. So Doug, take it away.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. My name is Doug Banks. I'm the executive editor of the Boston Business Journal. I'll be moderating our conversation today. Our panel today has 3 people, and our topic is change makers, why the future is now. We're going to be discussing change as a financing strategy, innovation as a way of attracting funding, and because the word now is in the title, we're going to talk about the importance of timing when it comes to entrepreneurship. Before we get started, why don't I have our panelists introduce themselves? If each of you could introduce yourself, just let our audience know who you are, what your day job is, and we have an author with us, so the most recent book that you've written and why you wrote it. And we'll start with Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sure. I'm Sarah Hodges. I'm a partner at Pillar VC. We're a seed stage venture capital firm here in Boston, co-founded by 22 CEOs of big billion-dollar companies here in town. And we're the first capital in for founders who are building the next generation of pillar companies here in Boston.
Thanks, Sarah. Lori, why don't you go?
Hi, my name is Lori Cashman. I'm a co-founder of Victress Capital. We're an early stage venture firm that backs gender diverse teams in the consumer technology space.
Thank you. And Christopher?
Hey, everybody. Hey, Doug. Thanks for having us. Christopher Mirabile. I run Launchpad Venture Group, which is an early stage angel network, a very active group here in Boston. I also spend a lot of my time on the board at the Angel Capital Association. And I'm also a founder of a software company and have been doing a fair amount of writing. And I'm relieved to say that our most recent book was finished this summer, called The Entrepreneur's Journey. And it's an attempt to sort of look at startup lessons through a more narrative lens.
Thank you, Christopher. Why don't I come right back to you? You co-wrote that book with Ham Lord, whom I've known for years, Joe Mandato, 2 entrepreneurs and investors like yourself. You've both been founders, senior management team members, board members, I think for over at least 3 dozen early stage companies at this point. And the three of you have invested literally hundreds of millions of dollars. Literally hundreds of companies and millions of dollars. One of the aspects of your book that I loved is that you have these different recurring themes that go along, and you tell the stories of 17 different companies. One of those themes is the fateful role of timing. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that from your book, and then Sarah and Lori, you can follow up with the fateful role of timing when you're looking at investments and working with entrepreneurs. Christopher?
There is so much pathos in the timing topic, right? And Sarah and Lori, I've seen this as well. You know, you can just have the right team and the right product and just be at the wrong moment in time. And it's just so painful. Sometimes it can be fixed with patience and additional capital, or a temporary pivot to try to keep the lights on while you wait for the necessary prerequisites to get into place. But it's one of the more dramatic and heartbreaking of the startup tales. And so with this book, Doug, we've done a fair amount of writing that is sort of how-to manuals for investors, if you will. And we wanted to do something that was a little bit more readable, frankly, and a little bit more fun, and a little bit more oriented around stories, and maybe a little bit more broadly applied so that it would be interest to entrepreneurs. And we got together with Joe because Ham and I have a lot of Boston, East Coast roots, and a lot of our stories are from, you know, this area. And Joe has been a prolific investor in Silicon Valley and has been a lecturer at Stanford Graduate School of Business. And so we sort of wanted to get some additional story DNA. And we spent a lot of time sort of thinking about lessons and boiling down into themes, and then organizing great examples of stories around those themes. And timing was definitely one of the big ones.
Sarah or Laurie, why don't you talk to us a little bit more about timing? The title of this panel is "The Future is Now." What makes now a good time, or given everything else going on, maybe not such a good time in terms of some of the pitches that you're seeing and the companies that you're investing in? Lori, why don't you go?
Sure. We talk a lot about timing, both with our investors and with founders. And in many cases, use the example of Google. I think it was the 14th search engine, right, to come on the scene. But so it doesn't always mean, you know, the first to market means you're the best positioned. And in our roles, and I'm sure, Sarah, you'd agree, like right now, there's a lot of disruption happening. I think the pandemic is, there are a lot of tensions and competing forces, and we're trying to anticipate what direction, you know, various things will move in. And so with that comes conversation around the eventual market size of different opportunities. And so as we get intrigued and energized by new business models or new ventures, we have to think about what we believe the demand will be in the future. And, you know, it's kind of obviously more art than science, but for sure, timing is a critical you know, component of our investment decisions.
Yeah, and you know, it's like the person on the longboard with the wave is really a great analogy, because you can start paddling too early, and then you're kind of all paddled out, and the wave hasn't arrived, and you can start paddling too late, and the wave just passes right under you, lifts you up for a second, and drops you back down. So it's so timing is just a very, very challenging piece of it.
Well, I remember when I was an editor at Fast Company magazine back in 2000 and 2001, right as the dot-com bubble was at its peak. Second mover advantage was as important as first to market. And those were the conversations that we were having back then. And that was 20 years ago. Sarah, talk to us a little bit more about just the importance of timing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Lori. We think this is really an incredible time to start a company. I think, you know, we're all going through a lot of transformation right now. We're working in different ways. We're feeding ourselves in different ways, probably eating at home more often. Healthcare has completely transformed over the last couple of months here. And so from our perspective, there are just a whole lot of areas that are really ripe for disruption right now. And there are also a lot of people who while certainly really busy, are finding themselves with headspace and mental space to think about creating something new. And so we think it's really a fantastic time to get started. In May, we were also thinking about how to transform ourselves as a firm. So much of how we met founders was by meeting them in person. And so we came up with the idea to start a virtual program called Frequency for people who were thinking about starting companies, thinking about taking that leap. And we were truly blown away. I think we've seen about 1,000 people apply for the program to date. So people are ready to start something new right now. And there are lots of opportunities from supply chain logistics to healthcare to e-commerce for people to dig into right now.
I would, Doug, I would agree with Sarah wholeheartedly on that. And, the other interesting thing about the moment we're in right now, as Sarah, I think, rightly pointed out, that receptivity to new models is very high because everything's topsy-turvy right now. But access to talent, co-founders and first hires is very, very good right now. There's a lot of disruption in the economy and also, the opportunity cost. If your day job is a lot less secure, or your future in the traditional career track is less certain, maybe it's less risky, relatively speaking, to get out there and go after that dream or that problem that's really bothering you and you really feel needs to be fixed. So I think it's a spectacular time to start something new.
Isn't it funny that you mentioned that if I remember correctly, the idea of fintech really took hold around 2008, 2009, when every banking and finance company shed thousands of people, and all of a sudden you had all these entrepreneurs, not necessarily because they wanted to be, but because, like you said, opportunity cost was such that why not go for it, right?
It can be. It doesn't always have to be societal. Sometimes it's technology. For example, one of the greatest stories of timing I think I've ever heard was, in the waning days of the sort of microcomputer era. Silicon Graphics was still a big player, and the cable industry was really gaining in power. And they got together and said, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool if our cable customers could just pick out what they wanted to watch and watch anything they wanted, on demand?" And they set up what was effectively the business model for Netflix. And it was a total and complete disaster because at that point in time in the 80s, there just wasn't the computing power and the software and the interfaces and the bandwidth to move that kind of video around. And it was clearly a genius idea. They were absolutely channeling what society wanted, but the technology just couldn't support the business model. And it was a disaster for everyone involved.
That's a great example.
Netflix came along and made it a win.
That's it. Well, after going through the DVD process first, once they realized that the postal service is probably not your best delivery mechanism for your technology, why not try streaming, right? Hey, you mentioned people, and I want to make sure that we talk about that. You, in your book, Christopher, you write about the importance of founding teams. Sarah and Lori, your firms both have very specific aims and goals around the teams for your portfolio companies. Talk about your approach to founder teams. Christopher, talk a little bit about what you have seen in founding teams. And then Sarah and Lori, why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about what your firms specifically look for? What are the key attributes? How do you identify those change agents? What do they need to look like now? Christopher, let's start it with you.
Well, great founders come in all shapes and sizes, and I think that it's really a mistake to take a very narrow aperture to sort of what you're looking for in a founder. But at the same time, I think it's really a mistake to underestimate the importance of that element, because the reality is that a lot of startup opportunities really boil down to, a team that's never done it before, creating a product that's never existed before, going after a market that doesn't exist yet. What could possibly go wrong, right? And no plan survives contact with the enemy. And so startup success is often very driven by founders sort of having the tenacity and the creativity and the EQ and the IQ to solve the problems, to revisit the plan, to fix as they go. And they end up being the one enduring thing. It's a little bit like the carpenter who says, "Oh yeah, this hammer, I've had this hammer my whole life. I've changed the handle 4 times and the head twice," right? It's like nothing of the original plan is still there, but that great team has sort of pirouetted and managed to sort of find a way through to market success. So it's a vitally important issue. And I think that we all sort of have a tendency to put our own life story and our own narrative and our own biases and our own perceptions around who that startup founder has to be. And I think we're all challenging ourselves to think more broadly about it and understand what it is we're looking for, right? And it is those things like tenacity and the ability to sort of get things done through other people and listen and learn and coach. And so it's a fascinating time right now if you're someone who thinks a lot about startup founders.
Lori, why don't we go to you next? The future is now. Victress Capital focuses on women-owned companies. Tell us a little bit more about why women-owned companies are the future and the future is now.
Well, we start with the data, and we know that diverse teams outperform on both top and bottom line metrics. So that's the thesis. And we really believe for us that the first filter is gender diversity. And we look at all measures of diversity with a core belief that, a talented team needs to reflect what the customer looks like. A talented team, both in the terms of management and the composition of the board, needs to have diverse perspectives and experience across all dimensions, and that better positions them, to be able to draw the right insights to whether it's risk management or understanding where the growth opportunities are. We really believe that diversity on the team is important, and we certainly over-index on team. As Christopher was saying, we look a lot at the qualities of the team and the founder, grit and resilience and, coachability or a growth mindset, passion, the charisma, the ability to recruit talent. We also look for domain expertise. So we need to believe that this founder or this founding team is uniquely positioned to win. What is it about their story, their experience, their background that has gotten them to this point, and that will ensure that they'll be successful as they move forward. So that's really, I think, fundamental to everything we do, is to start with team. And then, of course, we look at business model. We talked about the eventual market size. We look at capital efficiency. But at its very core, that team is the most critical component.
Thanks, Sarah. What are some key attributes that you're looking for in your investments, in the people, your startups?
Sure. I love that you asked this question, because the vast majority of what we're considering and looking for at the earliest stages are the people and the humans. I think, Christopher, as you said it, you nailed it. So much will change 12 months from now, but the people will still be the same. They'll still be leaving the business. So we oftentimes will pull ourselves back and say, are we too worried about a concern with the market or the size of the opportunity? Is this an exceptional human in front of us who really will just do great things? And so we think about three core characteristics. The first is really a blow through walls mentality and resilience, and the ability to get knocked down, pick yourself back up, find a path forward, not just once, but over and over again, because that's what the founder journey really involves. And then we look for people who are incredibly curious, always looking to learn more about themselves and the world around them. They're very self-aware, but they're interested in feedback from others and have conviction in their own decision-making at the same time. And then the final characteristic we mentioned, we look for, Lori mentioned, which is so important, and it's that natural sales ability and the ability to create momentum and get people excited about your mission and vision and get them to want to join on board. I think some of the most successful founders are able to convince people with very little capital, very little compensation to join their team as team members or advisors in the early days, because their vision is just infectious. And so those are some of the things we think about when we're considering founders to back.
Thank you, guys. Anything more to add on that, or I'll go to, because I have another couple more questions. All right, let me go to this the next idea that I would like to discuss, which is when we think about 2020, we really think about change. Obviously, at the Boston Business Journal, we have been publishing so many stories about pivots. So 3D printing companies that pivot to make medical devices because there's a need. Textile and apparel companies that are pivoting to make masks, face masks. And then, of course, racial equity, gender equity have been a huge issue this year as well. I'm wondering if we're going to see a pivot on race and gender the way we've seen pivots on products in 2020. What change do you see as the most likely to come in Q4 and 2021 as you're looking ahead? Will we see a pivot on race and gender the way we have in some of these other products?
Boy, I sure hope so. I'm not a social scientist, so it's hard to say, but I really am encouraged by the level of dialogue that we're having right now. I feel like I do feel like we're at a breakthrough moment where everybody, at least everybody in my network in the early stage investing community, just felt like, how could we not stop and mark this moment with George Floyd, saying, "I can't breathe." And I just I've had more sort of conscience-raising conversations about these issues in the last year than probably in the previous 2 or 3 years combined. So I kind of am an optimist, and I'm hopeful, Doug, that we will see a pivot, but all I can do is do my part.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Christopher. Lori?
I do believe that we're on the verge of a paradigm shift. I'm encouraged to see that, the big institutions, the endowments, pension funds, the big, capital deployers are beginning to open up to more transparency, to understand that they need to reflect their values in the way that they invest. And I think bringing that all the way down the chain to the consumer, we believe that in terms of a pivot, consumers are demanding transparency and authenticity, and they can see the values of, in our work, it's a consumer brand, but they can see what that brand stands for. They understand what the values of the founders and the company are, and they're voting with their dollars if they don't believe that aligns with their own personal values. And I think that will continue and deepen as we move forward.
Sarah, will we see race and gender diversity make a pivot when it comes to entrepreneurship? Will we see more Black entrepreneurs getting funded, more women's startups getting funded?
I agree with Lori and Christopher. I certainly hope so. I think it's been a gut-wrenching few months, but also pretty hope-inducing because there's a broader conversation and awareness about the lack of funding for underrepresented founders. And so I think it's certainly been a moment that's caused all of us in the venture industry to look internally at our team composition, at our portfolio composition, at some of our processes, at how we source and how we connect with founders and get beyond that first tier circle of known connections. So I think it's been a time for deep examination. And I agree with Lori. I think both institutional investors all the way down to the consumer are starting to demand that transparency. And so that gives me hope that we are headed in that direction.
Well, I'll share one statistic that we just recently published earlier in October. The annual number of SBA loans, these are the 7A loans, to Black businesses has decreased 84% since it peaked after the 2008 financial crisis. And that's despite a 48% growth in the economy and a 101% increase in bank deposits. And an 82% jump in commercial loans. So there's clearly been unequal access at the 7A loan program. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see more and more Black entrepreneurs going to folks like yourselves for private equity and entrepreneurship there. But let's, before we wrap up, we're going to, I want to make sure we wrap up on time. And I want to go to the other end of the spectrum now. Let's talk about exit strategies during tumultuous times. If the future is now, which is the point of this panel, and startup investors are always looking for an exit, what do exit strategies look like now? We're seeing, is it IPO? We're seeing these special purpose acquisition companies flourishing all over the place. All of a sudden, everybody's talking about SPACs. So what do exit strategies look like now for you and your portfolio companies? Why don't we, Sarah, how about if I come right back to you?
Sure. We haven't seen a significant amount of change on this front, but we're also extremely early stage investors. So most of the companies in our portfolio have either recently raised capital or just starting to get out to market. I certainly think there are a number of companies that have been in hard hit sectors that have had to think about an acquisition sooner than they might have expected. On the other hand, I think there are founders who are looking inward and just truly showing that resilience and thinking about, well, how do I bridge my way to the market really recovering and my industry coming back? So, we haven't seen much change, but that's in part a product of how early we're operating.
Thanks, Sarah. Lori, how about you?
We are also early. We talk a lot about having multiple exit options. So if there's a path to profitability, if you're executing well, you ought to have an exit opportunity, whether it's private equity, possibly an IPO, some merger with a competitor. Jury's out on the SPACs, I think, but in any event, we believe that there's M&A activity at times like this, and there'll be M&A activity in the future, depending on the bigger companies needing to acquire new customer base, needing to acquire more of an e-commerce distribution channel. I think that we feel very good about the positioning of our companies and just encourage them to stay focused on execution.
Yeah, Doug, I think there's a lot of commonality between the three of us in terms of how we invest. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about deploying capital the way the three of us do is that we really are in for a pretty long haul, and our perspective on companies generally transcends the business cycle. We're in these companies for 6, 7, even 8 years or longer. And so an 18-month recession dip is a detail, especially if a company's still sort of trying to find product market fit or solve a science problem or, whatever the case may be. So that's something I think that we all have in common. I think another thing we have in common is that for the most part, accessing the public markets is complicated, and much more than it was in the dot-com era in terms of the availability and appetite for small IPOs. It's just it's harder to get out there, and you see SPACs in some ways are a symptom of that. It's a way of kind of backdooring your way into being public without having to do a full 1933 Act registration statement for the company itself. You just do it for the SPAC, but one way in which we differ a little bit, as angels and VCs, is that we are seeing a little bit of increase in non-traditional kinds of exits as angels, because we don't run a fund and we're not fiduciaries to LPs. Every angel makes her own or his own decision, and so we're seeing a fair amount of activity. For example, last year, we sold chunks of 5 different SaaS companies to growth stage PE firms. We've had exit opportunities to people like Lori and Sarah. They'll come into a company and they'll offer a little liquidity to early investors. We're seeing liquidity in the context of strategic investments. So angels are seeing a little bit of liquidity around the edges, that sort of those non-traditional kinds of paths to liquidity have increased. But for the most part, it's pretty much same old with a fad du jour on the side, a side helping of a fad.
Thanks, Christopher. That's great. Okay, I've got one last question for you. Sarah, I'm going to go to you first, and you can call this our speed round as we exit. What innovation would you like to see now that you haven't seen yet? Or another way, to put it another way, what idea would you fund tomorrow if somebody brought it to you?
Sure. We had 50 in-person events at Pillar last year. And so meeting with people face-to-face is really what feeds our soul. And we miss it so much right now. And I have yet to see a digital platform emerge that recreates that magic of meeting someone in person and captures that ability to have that deep, meaningful conversation with someone. So if someone could create that, I'm all in.
Thank you, Sarah. Great to see you. Lori, how about you?
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I would just build on that in the sense of community. I feel like a lot of people are really craving interaction and relationships. And so whether there's a way to, have a hybrid of building community that's partly virtual and partly in person, I think I'll be curious to see what new models come out of this experience.
Thanks, Lori. And Christopher, how about you?
I'd invest in a way of getting big city sophisticated medical care out to small towns, some kind of a virtual or telemedicine solution that takes some of the learning and quality of care we associate with big medical centers and getting it out to the people who need it the most.
Well, if ever there was a year that telemedicine had the ears of the public, this is it. And as you mentioned, the technology is finally there to do it. And now the government is actually starting to allow it to be funded. So this could be the year. Well, I just want to thank the three of you for spending some time with us today. This has been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank Larry and his team for letting us have this conversation. And with that, I will just say thank you very much, everybody. It was great to see you, and hope everybody in the audience has a great day. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Doug, thank you. And Larry, Sarah, and Christopher, thank you. Debbie, that was great fun. And I just want to mention Christopher and his co-authors have written a terrific book that is a great companion to yours. So folks who might be watching and enjoyed that panel, talk about change and pivoting. What a great set of topics. We could have gone on and on. But alas, we don't have time. So next up, Debbie, you get to talk to Jaime Schmidt, a co-founder of Portland-based Schmidt's Naturals, talk about a change maker. I'm really excited to hear this discussion, so I'll let you start.
Yeah, I'm so excited that she's able to join us today. So here we go.
Hi, everyone. In this next session, we have Jaime Schmidt with us. She's the founder of Schmidt's Naturals, which she founded in her kitchen in 2010. Her new book, Supermaker, came out this fall, and it's a wonderful read about her entrepreneurial journey, founding her company with lots of lessons for entrepreneurs and innovators of all kinds, as well as personal stories that really show you a lot of insight and emotion around a journey like this that started way back in 2010. Jaime actually sold the company to Unilever in 2017, and now she is an investor and advisor and really someone who's giving a ton back to the entrepreneurial community all over the U.S. So welcome, Jaime. I'm excited to chat about your book.
Hi, Debbie. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's so great to see you. You must be really busy these days on your virtual book tour. Hope it's going well.
Yeah, it's been great. Definitely, different from the in-person events, but I'm really enjoying it. It's really opened up a lot of opportunity actually to pursue additional events that I hadn't considered before COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that's true. So the book is amazing. I've read it and I really loved it, and I found a lot for myself in it, and I'm sure other entrepreneurs are as well. But tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, why did you write the book and what do you hope people get from it?
Well, first, I'd never imagined writing a book. It wasn't something in my thinking ever until I sold the business, and I realized I had a lot of information to share and a lot of experiences I had gone through, lessons learned that I knew would be helpful to other entrepreneurs. One of my biggest goals in writing the book was really to put out the message that entrepreneurship is within reach. I don't think it's for a certain type of person. I think it's attainable for everybody, and that was really important for me in writing this. And so I structured the book in a way that really lays out kind of everything building up to me starting my business. So I know a lot of people can really identify with that soul searching journey, that process that we go through to really figure out what we want to do with our lives. So I get a bit into that, but then I really go deep into, founding the business, growing it, scaling it, and just all the really kind of practical things that come up in doing so. And so my goal there is to really, I say it's not about putting out a playbook and saying you have to grow your business this way. It's more, here's how I grew my business. These are the things I learned. These are the challenges I went through. And here's, some takeaways that hopefully you can implement into your business. And so the feedback I've been getting is really great. I hear from people who say the story is really relatable. It's inspired them, to give them the confidence to grow their business. And so I'm really excited with the way things have been going since launching a few weeks ago.
That's great. In reading one of the reviews of the book, I kind of chuckled because the reviewer said it's equal parts memoir, business book, and thriller. So your journey was, pretty exciting.
I love that.
All along the way. And I really did love how you wove in so many personal stories and, different things that you went through just, emotionally and thinking about your future as you were building this business. So as you look at the book and you sort of see your journey written out like this, what do you look back on as your favorite part of it? And what do you think was your least favorite part of it?
I think just seeing how much I developed on a personal level as a businesswoman, Going back 10 years ago to when I started the business, I was, a bit of a different person, and the business changed me. Everything that I had gone through just really has kind of shaped me into a new person, just like everything else in life, right? So that's been really fun, is just to go back to those first days of the inspiration behind starting the business, and just like how kind of naive I was and everything that I was forced to learn. I actually had dug deep into some of the old emails and writing this book to see, some of the early conversations I had had, and it was just really, really cool to see. One thing that I was really impressed with was my just tenacity and persistence, and so that was really kind of fun to see that part of me come out. And then if I think about least favorite part, I don't know that I have one. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's things that, I probably would have done differently in building the business if I had a book like this to refer to. And
you didn't have a business background at all, right?
No, I mean, I have a degree. I got a BA in business from Michigan State University, and then a master's in sociology, which were helpful. There are definitely some things learned there. But I don't think any schooling can really prepare anybody for, for really what it takes to jump in and build a business. And that's one thing that's important, that I want people to understand too, is that you don't need a certain type of background. You can learn things as you go. You don't always know what you need to learn right away, but as you're building, it'll become clear. Every step of the way, there's something new that you'll have to learn, and you just have to jump in and figure it out.
Right. I love how you talk about the tenacity, though, that like you even surprised yourself that you didn't know you had that kind of tenacity.
Yeah. I think when you believe in something so much, and it just comes naturally. Because I hadn't really considered myself that type of, I guess, aggressive person either. But I believed in the brand so much and the product, and I felt like people needed it, and so that gave me the confidence to just push forward. And yeah.
Besides tenacity and passion for the product, you talk a lot about excellence as a core value. How did excellence play into building your company and creating your products for the world?
Yeah, when I started Schmidt's, I'd spent a lot of time trying to perfect my product. I was at farmers markets, so I would meet with customers who would give feedback, and that helped me build and create the product to their liking. But I think when I think about excellence, it really sometimes just means just jumping in and trusting that it'll get better as you go, and that if you think something's perfect or excellent, you might be surprised, right? You'll get feedback from people that surprises you, that about your product that you hadn't considered. So I think it's more about values really too, and like understanding what you stand for as a brand and as an entrepreneur, and letting that guide you as you build. Mm-hmm. So just really, it's hard as you get bigger because there are a lot of challenges that come up, and you're really faced with big decisions every day.
Right.
So having the values to fall back on and knowing what you stand for, is going to be key. I think that's the one grounding thing that every entrepreneur needs to know.
Yeah, so to feel really secure in those values as you embark on the journey.
Right. Yeah.
Sort of touch back to them at times to make sure that you're still being true to that.
And also on that too, not being overly rigid, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs start out and they say, okay, I have this concrete set of like values or things that are important to me, and this is what we stand for, but it might change, and that's okay. Just allowing it to flex, but falling back on what's most important to you.
Do you have an example of that where you really had to kind of flex and maybe potentially relook at something that you were so certain about at the beginning?
Yeah, I do. When I started making the deodorant, I was packaging in glass jars. It was really important to me to offer something not only that looked beautiful and was different, but was sustainable. So that's why I loved the glass. But it became clear pretty early on that customers wanted a more traditional approach to putting on their deodorant. With the jars, you had to literally rub the product in your underarms with your hands, and not everybody was willing to do that. And so I knew to really grow the business, I had to reach that customer base that wanted a traditional plastic stick. So in doing that, it was a big decision for me, but I was able to move forward in confidence because I knew that, for one, I could source sticks that had been made with recycled plastics or use sticks that could be recycled. And also I could implement a recycling club for my jars, which was really cool. So I put together a process or a program where customers could send back 5 jars of used deodorant and then get a free one. So that was a nice way to keep the sustainability aspect more at the forefront too.
That's a great example. So like you sort of were going down one path and you thought of new options that actually helped you grow the business even more. So sometimes it can really help you to kind of look at the broader picture and sort of say, how important is this? If it is really important, is there another way to do it where I can still accomplish the mission of what I'm trying to get to?
Right.
Yeah, I love that. Well, so at Babson, we recently have done a bunch of research on family entrepreneurship, and it really talks about how the majority of the entrepreneurship around the world is actually family entrepreneurship. And it's family powered, whether it's child parent or husband and wife or siblings or couples. And so you founded Schmidt's in your kitchen with your baby by your side and your husband by your side. And then your husband has really joined you working on the business very early on. So I'm curious to know what it was like to work with your husband, and was there anything about working on a startup together that surprised you?
Well, we met at a job. So, that's always been a key part of our relationship. It's just, I wouldn't say key, but it's always been like, I guess, an interesting point about our relationship is that we've always worked together. So I think that helped in some ways, that we already had been used to, that type of dynamic. But it was definitely challenging and interesting and fun. I'd say you have to have ground rules and understandings about, each other and what, is what's most important in maintaining, those energies throughout your relationship. And so, for example, do we want to talk about work at dinner, right? And that's kind of cliche, but it's like, where do we set the boundaries? What are we willing to flex on? But what I think my favorite thing about it is like having, my husband next to me to celebrate the victories, right? Because when you're an entrepreneur, every victory is just so exciting, and it's really cool to really experience it together. But at the same time, those setbacks too can be really difficult to power through. And so I think one thing that helped us is, if one person is, really kind of struggling and needs extra support, then the other one has to step up and be the strong one. And so it's really kind of a balance always.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's nobody that you trust more than your husband to have your back, right?
Yeah.
That's so important too. Well, so a piece of advice you give in the book that I really loved is you said, pay attention to what gives you joy. And for entrepreneurs, you felt like this was a really important thing for them to understand in trying to decide what path they want to go down. So what do you think that means, and how do you do it? How do you listen to what gives you joy?
Yeah. Before starting Schmidt's, I had quite a career journey. I had really been soul searching, I guess, and trying to find, work that satisfied me for a long time. And I didn't figure it out until founding Schmidt's. I was 31, so not very early in my career. And so for me, it was really just this unwillingness to settle. I didn't know what I wanted to be doing, but I knew what I didn't want to be doing. And that was just always like one step closer to figuring it out. And so, I was willing to get my hands dirty and try a lot of different things. And always just having this mentality of like, I'm not going to settle until it feels right. And I truly believe that once you find it, you'll know, because with me, I began formulating personal care products and just making things, and it felt like nothing had ever felt before. I really was actually loving the work. And so that was just multiplied when I started getting out in the community and talking to customers. And so I guess, by the word joy, it just means like, true love for the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I really like that piece of advice, and that's something I'm going to share with other entrepreneurs on the way, because I think it's important to just be aware of it. Like, find when you're in flow and when you're, just feeling great about what you're doing. And
and it doesn't always mean, quitting your job and just running off and trying to figure things out. I mean, you can still work, we have to make money, but then just even explore side hobbies and just, it's not always a career change. Sometimes it's just finding a little passion project that we're excited about. And for me, that's kind of what I thought in the beginning, was like, okay, I might not love my job, but it's, it's paying the bills. And maybe what I need is just a little little hobby, to keep me happy. And that's how Schmidt started. But then, it grew into this huge business, and I didn't anticipate that in the earliest years.
Yeah, amazing. So you're no longer at Schmidt's since Unilever owns it, and you're so busy. You're doing so much for the maker community and for the entrepreneurship community. It's incredibly amazing how much time you're spending helping others now. And one of the things I thought was really interesting was this new investment fund called Color that you've started. And can you tell me a little bit about that and how it will work? And why was it important to you to really work on something specifically for underrepresented founders?
Yeah, so even though I'm speaking with Schmidt, I do have a lot of other projects, and you mentioned Color as one of them. That's an investment fund that I started along with my husband, Chris. After building the business, we both walked away with a lot of experience and insights that we were excited to put into other businesses and to support other founders. And we also recognized there was a real opportunity in underrepresented communities where funding is just short. I mean, there's not enough capital in the hands of women and people of color. So we started with, that at the forefront of our mission really is to support these founders. And there's just so much incredible opportunity that's overlooked. And so this was, I guess, a couple years ago, we started the fund. And we are really passionate about consumer products. That's where our experience is, and that's where we can really have the most impact. Also, kind of moving a bit into some tech, exploring different opportunities there, and also really passionate about just commerce in general and the way people buy things. So that's been really fun, and just a way for us to stay relevant and to be helpful to the greater community. We do find ourselves talking people out of investment often. Not your typical investment.
That's great.
Yeah, because I bootstrapped Schmidt. I never raised money from the VC, and so I know that it's possible. And so there are times when we're approached by founders thinking they need the money, but they maybe don't. And so we'll find ourselves talking people out of it and saying, let's consider this approach, or come back in a year, after you spent some time bootstrapping.
Yeah, I think that's smart. It's really helpful advice. Well, so another project that I thought was really cool that you're working on is the Entrepreneur Dream Project. And you got an incredible cast of mentors involved in this program. So tell me a little bit about the program and how did you get all those amazing entrepreneurs to sign on and do this? And then let's talk a little bit about mentorship. So
I started the Entrepreneurial Dream Project as part of the media company Supermaker, which I also founded with my husband, Chris. And this was really in response to COVID-19 and the impact that it was having on new businesses. So our goal there was to keep the entrepreneurial dream alive. This was back in March when it was just a very scary time. And it's hard enough building a business in normal conditions, and we just wanted to make sure that founders felt supported in moving forward. So there were two ways we did that through this program. One was through a monetary grant. We gave away $50,000 to two different founders who were building. And then in addition to that, we built up a mentor network of about 50 mentors. As you mentioned, we had some pretty big names in there. We had Mark Cuban, Rebecca Minkoff, and just a bunch of other really seasoned operators and entrepreneurs. You asked how we gathered so many incredible people really reaching out. Everybody wanted to help. It wasn't hard to build up this great mentor network. We simply cold emailed some people and heard.
So these weren't people that you just hang out with normally.
Some we had connections to for sure. Being in the industry, there were definitely friends that we could tap into. But some, like Mark Cuban, for example, we sent a cold email and he wrote back right away and said, "Yeah, I'll be in. And I'll be part of this." And so it was really cool to see people just so willing to help.
Yeah.
And so that program's been great. We've been pairing up 10 different companies with this pool of mentors. So each company gets about 3 different mentors that they rotate through just to help with whatever they need right now with their business.
And how long do you expect it to keep going?
Each one committed to a few sessions, and then some of the relationships will continue to build. And it's just an individual basis. So I know some are going beyond the program because they like the relationship and they want to continue to have impact and help. So it's really individualized.
Nice, nice. Well, so obviously, mentorship must have been very important to you and your journey. In your Entrepreneur's Dream Project, I think it's really amazing that you brought together this great cast of mentors. Can you talk a little bit about how mentorship affected you in your journey, or whether you had any mentors that were helpful to you?
In building Schmidt, my mentor group was really my peer group. I found support in other entrepreneurs, the community of mentors that I was surrounded by. But in scaling, I think it definitely would have been helpful to have that one or two mentor that I could just go to for things that I needed support with. And I just didn't take the time to step away from the work. I was so caught up operationally with what was right in front of me, but I definitely see there could have been value there in partnering with at least one mentor.
Yeah, so that's great. So now you're kind of bringing that learning to others and helping them get access to some amazing people that can help them. That's phenomenal. So talk a little bit about sort of post Unilever. I know that you're involved with the company on a different level. How's that relationship working? How do you feel about this new role? Do you think you'll start another company someday based on this experience?
I've been very happy with the relationship with Unilever. It was a clear win for me when we partnered. I knew that we had a lot of the same values, that Schmidt's could really expand in their hands. And 3 years later, I'm happy to say that we have. I'll always be connected to the brand. It's my baby. My name is on it. You asked if I would start another company. My investment fund Color takes a lot of my time. I have my media company Supermaker and my book. There's other projects that I'm looking at, but starting an actual consumer products company again, I don't know if I have it in me, but we'll see. I'm most excited about really supporting other brands and just seeing other founders develop, and so that's where I'm putting most of my energy now.
Wonderful. So any last piece of advice for people who are like you right now, but working in their kitchen to build the next great consumer packaged goods brand?
I'd say enjoy every step of the way. I heard from a founder recently who was feeling discouraged because she was still working in her kitchen. I hadn't moved out into a warehouse or production space. And I told her, just savor these moments because they're just so special. And I always tell people, take too many photos, write things down, and one day you'll look back and say, wow, I've come a long way. So yeah, just don't look too far ahead and really just tackle what's right in front of you.
Yeah, and catalog the journey so you can look back on it and really remember it. Because it probably feels like a blur now to you.
Yeah, and all those days were just so special in their own way.
Yeah, oh, that's wonderful. So thank you, Jaime. It was wonderful to have you with us today. It was great to hear your story. I highly recommend the book, Supermaker. It's wonderful. It is definitely equal parts memoir, thriller, and business book. Lots for people to learn, but put in such a simple way and a really readable way. So thank you for making that too and putting it out into the world.
Yes, my pleasure.
What a terrific interview. Thank you, Debbie. She's so authentic, and the subtitle of her book, Crafting Business on Your Own Terms, is so appropriate. And so this is the part where if we were doing this live at Babson, Debbie and I would be ushering you over to our independent bookseller, Wellesley Books, and telling you to buy the book, support our authors, and certainly meet some of our innovators. I'm so glad that so many of you have been able to do that today. Debbie, what did you think? What did you think was sort of the most important and thoughtful takeaway from a really authentic conversation with Jaime? Because there's so much in there. Thank you, Debbie. And again, thank you to our sponsors. This would not be possible without Brown & Brown Insurance, The Buzz, Innovation Women, the Boston Business Journal, and Bostino. I also want to thank our tech team. I want to take this moment to thank our tech team: Nancy McCarthy, Alexandra Dunk, Travis Gray, Sean Gunther, John Florendo, Sue Nealon, Cindy Klein Marmer, and my own Chief Marketing Officer, Leah Russell. Thank you for helping us pull this all together. This is an amazing event and fun to do online, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. I'm excited about our next panelist. Debbie, you want to turn up your volume and tell us about it? Welcome again to Authors and Innovators. I'm really thrilled that our next author is also an innovator. Sarah Frey is an American farmer and business owner. She's the CEO of Frey Farm, the largest grower of pumpkins in the United States. What's really interesting and fascinating about her new book, The Growing Season: How I Saved an American Farm and Built a New Life, is that Sarah was raised on a small 100-acre farm in southern Illinois, where at age 8, she and her mom would sell and buy watermelons from local farmers and go store to store making deliveries during the summer. At age 17, with her dad ill, she secured a loan and bought the family business. As the business continued to grow, Sarah's other brothers returned home to work with her, where they remain today. And today, the company, Frey Farms, has growing operations in 7 states, and they are one of the biggest suppliers of pumpkins, watermelons, cantaloupes, sweet corn, winter squash, and other fall ornamentals in the United States. Sarah's also an innovator, and we're going to talk a little bit about her latest idea, summer watermelon juice. Sarah serves on a variety of industry boards and has a national reputation. And I'm so pleased to welcome Sarah Frey to talk about her new book, The Growing Season. Welcome, Sarah. So, Sarah, this book, it was just terrific, and I wrote about this in my column in the Boston Business Journal. It's a memoir, but it's also a story about building a new independent entrepreneurial life. So let's start a bit at the beginning. Sarah, this is one of the, it's so fascinating. You are one of the youngest of 21 children. Your parents combined 21 children, and you grew up in this farm in southern Illinois. What was your life like back then?
Well, it was kind of like it is now. It was actually very isolated. So, what's really ironic about the time in which we find ourselves in now as a country is that for me, it's very similar to how I grew up as a child. So I grew up on the small farm, 80 acres. I grew up in a home with my 4 older brothers from my parents' marriage. And so they each had children from previous marriages that were much older than us. And so I grew up as the only girl in the household, besides my mother, with these 4 older brothers in southern Illinois, in a very rural, isolated part of the country, and with dreams of escaping this life, through really my entire childhood. I dreamed of, the day that I would get off of the farm. And, what's really ironic about the time we find ourselves in today is that this place that I spent so much of my time dreaming to escape is now the escape. So it's so crazy because, everyone is looking to get out of the cities and, get out to a more rural lifestyle and sort of to get away from people and being, stacked on top of each other. And for me, it was just, there's so much irony in this year, but it was, outside of those feelings of knowing that there was a bigger world out there, and I felt like there were more things awaiting me after I got off of the farm, there were also really great memories being made here on the farm with my 4 older brothers. So, you know, as the youngest and the only girl, oftentimes I would be left behind when they would go do, you know, fun boy stuff like, hey, we're going to go hunt now for dinner, or, you know, we're going on this very dangerous adventure, but no, you can't go, you know. So when I was really little, I spent the majority of my time just being really, you know, sort of upset that the boys were leaving me behind. So when I was, you know, they finally started taking me along when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and, you know, on a few of the adventures, on the few of the more, you know, sort of their safer adventures. And then I tell the story of, you know, shooting my first rabbit, in the book. But, you know, I really didn't shoot the rabbit. We find out that, you know, later on they tell me, no, we just wanted to build your confidence. You know, we had already shot the rabbit and we propped it up in the bush, and we let you believe that you were the greatest hunter in the world, you know, when you went with us. So, you know, my life was full of adventures growing up on the farm. There's some difficult things as well that I share in the book, things that very difficult things that I went through as a child. But for the most part, the memories here are of close family bonds and growing up, ultimately, you know, working together. And that was what led me to make that decision later on when I was a teenager, that I was going to stay behind instead of, you know, follow after my brothers who had all left the farm. So it was those family bonds and that closeness that made me come to the realization that I wanted to create and build a life that would allow us to all be back together again, working together, like we had when we were children. And my fear in that moment was that if I left, we wouldn't have anything to come home to.
I love how you infuse so much of the early part of the book, which makes it really engaging. You talk about your family, the good, the bad, the candid. Tell me about more, tell our viewers more about your mom and dad, both of which unique people, but entrepreneurs in both cases. Talk a little bit about your mom and your dad and their entrepreneurial influence on you.
Yeah. So, you know, my father had, you know, this big racehorse dream, and it's the horse racing industry isn't called the sport of kings for nothing. I mean, you really have to be a king. You have to have a lot of money to really be successful in that. But we had, you know, we had horses on this farm, thoroughbreds, and it was more of a breeding farm. But he had this dream and this passion that really sort of, you know, it came before anything else. You know, at times it came before his family. And I think so many times you hear this with entrepreneurs or really wildly successful people who have started companies, you know, that like it becomes an obsession, and then everything else sort of falls to the wayside. And then when at the end of their life, they look back and they reflect, was all of that really that important? What did I do with my time here? And I watched my father really kind of go through that as a young girl. And I watched him, you know, and it wasn't just with the horses. You know, he actually was in some respects a good and fair businessman in some of his dealings. But then there were times when I saw him, you know, I watched him sort of like hustle and you know, spin and do things that really weren't that straightforward. So he was a promoter. He was. And so for me, you know, as a little kid, like I had a front row seat to all of that. And then I watched my mother in the summers work so hard. I mean, she worked hard year round, but I watched her, you know, get in that truck every morning. I'd get in with her and we would go out and we would, you know, go from the farm to, you know, load the melons to store to store to store. And I watched just how her style was very different than his. Her style was very straightforward, very matter of fact. And she didn't really have that sort of real like salesy, trying to upsell somebody. It was more like, do you want the melons or not? It's hot outside. If you don't want any, I got to go because, it's hot in the back of the truck. They're great today. And that's where I think I really helped her as a little kid because I had more of I loved people. And so getting off of the farm, to go with her on the melon route was the most exciting part of my life. I mean, I looked forward to these summers when I would actually get in that truck. If she would leave me, I would be chasing the truck down the road like, no, wait, I'm going with you. So, and just watching, she had, and still has to this day. It's really incredible. My mother's, she'll be 80 this year, and she still has a melon route. She delivers melons.
Wow.
And we can't stop her. There's nothing we can do. So she just has an incredible work ethic. And, she was about get the job done, complete the task. And so I was able to, I sort of I felt like, seeing all of that with my parents, both the what to do, what not to do, really sort of shaped me as a child. And because I started learning all of that so young, that's how I think. And then, combined with all of the experiences that I had here on the farm, observing my parents, the experiences I had on the farm, both good and bad, really sort of shaped me into the, young woman that I would later become. And I tell all of those stories in the growing season because it was really the foundation for, how I was able to take risks, take a stand, and have the confidence to pursue a dream at such an early age.
And so you take this from the book. I did. It's so engaging and so entertaining. You're very much a blend of those entrepreneurial styles. As you said, your dad's a promoter, your mom's no nonsense. We got to get this done.
Yeah.
So let's take our viewers and you talk about this, and I want them all to enjoy this piece of the book because I did. You get to a point where you say to your dad, look, we're going to lose this, but I'm not going to let that happen. We're doing this. I'm going to buy this.
Right.
Talk about that as a 17-year-old young entrepreneur.
Right.
You just said, I'm going to do this.
Well, there was so much that had happened to get me to that point. I mean, the farm, we were always in fear of losing the farm. It was, every 6 months or every year when it came time to make the payment, how were we going to get them? From my earliest memories were of making farm payments or not having enough money or having to float an electric bill or, okay, we can pay this month, but we can't pay that. But the big thing every year was, what do we do? How do we get the money together to make a farm payment? And then most of it was, then it was listening to my father trying to negotiate extensions with the bank and we can't just pay it all right now. And this, so I had felt like, by that point, I had seen this movie over and over and over again. And I was out on my own by that point. I had moved out when I was 15 this summer, right when I turned 16. So, and then had started my business and I was making money, right? But now I'm making money on my own. I'm able to keep that money and reinvest that money into my business. And I'm not having to hand over every single dollar to my parents. And I'm avoiding my parents as much as I can too, so I don't have to give them the money, right? So I'm thinking about getting away. So, at that point, it's not, at the time I was 16, it's not about the farm. It's about escaping and creating a better life for myself away from the farm. So, but by the time I made the decision at 17 that I was going to take things over, it was really a matter of the circumstances. My father's health was failing, and he and my mother, their relationship had really unwound, and things were really out of control personally. And I knew that if I was going to step in and take over, that it wasn't going to be, a situation where I was going to continue to fund something that I had watched be unsuccessful my entire life, that we were going to have to do it my way. And my way meant I was going to be the one to take over the farm. And I was going to be the one to make the decisions, and it was the only way it was going to work.
I love how that. I love how you set that up in the book, and I'll leave it to the readers to enjoy that. Once you got the farm, one of the turning points, of course, is that you were able to cut a production deal with Walmart, and this has been the separate focus of a Harvard Business School study. Really negotiating 4th of July watermelon prices with Walmart. Talk about that first. Just such a great entrepreneurial story, Sarah.
Sure.
Talk about that first conversation with Walmart and saying, I'm going to do this. And then your reaction, which I thought was so human after that, saying, I can't believe what I just got myself into.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
So I had been delivering to their stores directly, their Division I stores, before they were converted to super centers. I had been delivering fresh produce to their Division I stores. So I had a relationship with, the store managers and the associates that worked at the stores. And it was what the work I was doing for them was very seasonal. And I happened to be, I was a one-woman show back then. And I happened to be driving past a distribution center that they had built. And I knew that they were converting some of their stores to, they were in the process of converting their stores to super centers. And so I remember driving by thinking, gosh, it would just be so much easier if I could, drop all of these melons off at that DC instead of having to take them to 12 different grocery stores. Well, little did I know when I walked into that distribution center that day, really, I don't think that I had a really good, clear understanding of the sheer amount of volume that they could take. And maybe I kind of knew, but it hadn't really sunk in, And so when I showed up without an appointment, I walked in the door. In fact, the DC wasn't even open yet, technically. And, I'm like looking around this place like, oh, this is a really nice facility. Isn't this great? And I run into this guy and I'm like, hey, by the way, I deliver melons to your stores, and, are you going to have a produce buying office here? Is there someone here that I can talk to about bringing my fresh produce here to this DC? And he said, as a matter of fact, we're going to have a fresh produce buying office, and the woman who's going to run that, she happens to be here today, and she's setting up her office. Would you like to meet her? And I said, well, absolutely. Take me to your leader. It was fantastic. And so, anyway, in that meeting with Laura, she was like really happy that I had walked through the door because I had made her life what she believed that I had made her life easier, because she said, wait, this is great. So you're already, delivering to the stores. You can bring the product here. That's fantastic. I need suppliers. And, can you deliver, whatever it was like 5 semi-loads of watermelons a week, 3 semi-loads of cantaloupes a week. And I said, sure, no problem. In my head, I'm thinking, this is what I do every day, right? I deliver fruit. And so anyway, she shook my hand and I said, okay, we'll be in touch. And I remember I had to get a Dun & Bradstreet number, and we had to get a more official. So I think I'm trying to think, I forget the process that I was using. The stores had paid me, but we had to get the vendor agreement and everything set up. But as I was walking out of the building after meeting with her, it goes off in my head. I didn't fully process the fact that she said semi-loads. Now, keep in mind, I'm walking out into the parking lot where my 1-ton Ford Dually pickup truck is parked with a 16-foot trailer behind it, right? That's all I had. I didn't have a semi. And I'm like, wait, she said loads, meaning semi-loads. I don't own a semi truck. Oh my gosh. And I just committed to this. And there wasn't a moment where I ever thought, well, I can't do it. I knew that I would figure it out. So I was confident in that, but I had this moment okay, this is something I have to figure out very quickly. This isn't something that, this is going to require help.
Just a great entrepreneurial moment. Yeah. And for so many of our listeners, that's just going to be terrific. I also love the story, and I'd love for you to just tell it. You were buying from some Amish growers. Mm-hmm. And And you also had to let Walmart know that you could fill that order. And Amish people don't exactly have a lot of technology. Can you tell that story? Because it's so fun in the book.
No, they don't. You know, I was, Walmart needed a lot of volume back then. And it was like piecing together, I had to piece together from a lot of different growers, all of the fruit that I needed to, you know, to help them meet their needs, their volume needs. And, you know, ironically, up in Rockville, Indiana, there was this group of Amish that had started growing pumpkins. And they grew these pumpkins, but they, you know, their harvest methods obviously were very antiquated. They, you know, they were harvesting with a team of horses and pulling a wagon, you know, like still load, which we still load pumpkins by hand, but we use, you know, buses now that go, you know, you could drive buses, you know, 60 miles an hour down the highway. They were using horses. And I remember just being on these crazy missions. I mean, the Amish, you know, that was really interesting dealing with them. And in fact, we still work with the Amish on some of the commodities that we market. But, you know, my life was full of so many interesting stories of being at farms and places, you know, at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, you know, rounding up fruit to fill an order for, you know, a major retail, you know, a big retailer. And, you know, one of the stories that I tell in the book was that I needed to use the telephone. And I was up there late one evening, getting loaded at this farm in the middle of these, you know, these hills and woods, and it was very isolated. And the children are out there, the Amish children are out there, and they're the harvest crew. And I said, I have to get to a telephone. I had a cell phone at the time. Remember the big old bag phones, right, but I had no service. And I said, I need a telephone. And the little boy points to the woods. And it's like a dark, scary woods. This is like the dead of fall in October. It's kind of cold and it's a little dreary. And I'm loading pumpkins in the middle of nowhere with this Amish family. And I look at the woods and I was like, there's a phone in there. And he just keeps pointing. And I'm like, okay, all right. Well, so then I take off and I walk a little less than a quarter of a mile. I mean, it was a long way in the woods to along a path where I find a phone hanging on a tree in a wooden box. So I see the box on the tree, and then I'm like kind of scared to open it. Honestly, it feels like a scene out of a bad movie. Like open the box.
Such a great story.
And there's the phone. So yeah, it was, you know, things like that happen to me all the time. Like and you just had to like go with it. There was, you know, I think that's just part of being an entrepreneur too. I mean, you just go through all of this stuff, and then someday, you know, you start to look back, and when I was writing the growing season, I had forgotten so much, and there were so many stories that I couldn't include that were just, you know, equally, maybe even better than that. It was just like, you know, what do you add? What stories do you tell? But that's sort of just all part of the process, like going through crazy things and having crazy experiences. And so many entrepreneurs have these stories. And anyway, for me, I felt like something like that happened to me at least twice a day, my entire life.
I think your stories, and it's so well put, Sarah. I think so much of what you're relating in the book will resonate with our entrepreneurs. They, like you, need to understand that perseverance, persistence, and a lot of luck play a role. So I want to talk a little bit about the products and sustainability and what you're thinking about Sama. Why pumpkins, Sarah? Of all the crops, talk about pumpkins. You are described recently in the New York Times as the pumpkin queen of America. Why pumpkins?
So when I bought this farm, I had to produce something on it. It was a small farm. And normally, even when I took over the farm, you had to, if you were going to grow corn or soybeans, you would need a minimum of 1,000 acres to make an okay living. probably more like 2,000 to be able to afford the equipment. So if you're growing corn or soybeans, you need a combine, $250,000 combine. You need a tractor, you need a disc, you need a planter, you need all of these things. You need, close to $700,000 worth of equipment. And so for me, I had to figure out, what can I grow? This is what I have. I have this 80 acres that I grew up on and 20 acres down the road where the little house was that I moved out into when I was very young. I'm thinking, what can I do with this very limited amount of acreage? So you have to learn to do more with less. And I think we all know that. Anybody that's been scrappy and started a business, that's the first thing you have to figure out. I mean, I have to figure out how to do more with less. And it was no different in farming. And that's why I chose pumpkins. To grow pumpkins, the soil was conducive to growing pumpkins. And I knew that I would have a market for the pumpkins because of the grocery stores that I was already selling to. I knew that it would be an easy transition from melons into a different season. And then I actually thought, okay, well then after pumpkins, maybe I'll do Christmas trees, and I'll be the live goods holiday person. Like, this will be my job, like working toward a holiday. And so that's why I started to grow pumpkins. And then I just had this love and this joy for pumpkins, and I felt joy when I saw them. So it was something that made me happy. And I knew that pumpkins were also a crop that made other people happy. And I thought, well, what better crop to grow than pumpkins? So when I started growing the pumpkins, it was like I said, it was a natural transition for my business going into another season and another commodity. But it was also something that I was very passionate about because of the joy that I felt like. So when I was delivering watermelons and cantaloupes, people would get excited. They'd be like, oh, those are great, great smelling, great tasting watermelons. And oh, look at the watermelon truck. But when they saw the pumpkin truck, it was a different kind of joy. They'd be like, oh, pumpkins. It was a different kind of excitement. And I fed off of that. And I thought, oh, the pumpkins make people happy. This is awesome. And so, that's why, that's why I grew the pumpkins, and that's why I have the love that I have for the fruit. It's like, it's something that makes people happy.
Yeah, it's such a great entrepreneurial lesson. Passion for the product and product mix. Yeah. You do that. You talk about it in the book in such an engaging and storytelling way. Sarah, so much of what you're doing with Frey Farms is thinking about what happens going forward. And I know one of the things that got you excited was this concept that you saw around sustainability. So growing up on a farm, you saw lots and lots of waste and decided that there were these ugly, overlooked products that need to be turned into something.
Right.
Talk about that. And for so many of our entrepreneurs who might say, well, this piece of what I'm doing is just junk. It's waste. You can do that. And you turn it into a new product line.
Yeah. What I really did was I really sort of tell this story. So when you read the book and you're going through the memoir and it takes you through the early years of my life on this really small farm that's very scrappy, and we're hunting, we're gathering, or we're having to kill our food, that you get the sense that nothing is going to waste, because nothing's going to waste. We're using everything. We're picking wild blackberries, in the summer, getting, full of chiggers. We're, raiding a truck patch. We're canning tomatoes. We're putting our food up for the winter and storing it in the cellar, or we're hunting for our food. So as a child and growing up and through my teen years, there was this waste not, want not, because that was a way of life. Food was simple, it was clean, and it was delicious, and nothing ever went to waste. Then when I started my business and I started growing my business, and I was looking at it, the industry, and not just the industry, but also my own growing business, I couldn't shake that feeling that I had from when I was a child, because we couldn't waste anything,
right?
You know? And so I'm looking around at the end of a harvest and I'm seeing all of this fruit that was visually imperfect. But I knew that it still tasted good and it still could have a purpose. And it bothered me personally because of the way that I was raised, you know, and to see food go to waste was an issue for me. So I started thinking about not just from a financial standpoint, but also from sort of a personal a core value standpoint. Like, I can't handle watching that happen. And, you know, what if, you know, how do we find this fruit's greater purpose? How do we turn it into something more? And that's why we started making the Sama watermelon juice. So we would have, you know, at the end of we would harvest millions of these watermelons. We'd have hundreds of thousands of watermelons that might be visually imperfect. Maybe they're misshapen, or, you know, they have maybe they're, you know, sun-kissed, which is a nice way of saying the melon got a little sunburnt. Right. But the fruit is still good to eat. So, you know, we decided to start taking that imperfect fruit. No one was making watermelon juice at the time. So we started juicing the melons on the farm. And that's when we started the brand Sama watermelon juice. And it has the funky name Sama because I'm a farmer geek, and we named the product after the mother of all watermelons. So all watermelon seeds originated from the ancient Sama melon, which still grows wild in the Kalahari Desert today. And it was a source of hydration. So for thousands of years, people used this melon to travel in the desert. Like, no one would travel unless it was Sama season. And I thought that story was so cool, and it resonated with me. And I thought, well, we have all of this innovation now around the seed varieties that we grow, but really we want to pay homage to the mother of all watermelons, which is the Sama watermelon, which sustains life and, you know, hydrated ancient civilizations for thousands of years. So we started making that juice out of the visually imperfect fruit. Now, granted, it's delicious. I mean, we cut every watermelon open by hand to make sure that the inside is perfect. But it doesn't matter what's on the outside. It's like with people. I mean, it's what's on the inside that counts. And we started making the juice. Then that led us to look at other things in our business and figure out ways that we can, you know, utilize more of what we're growing. And the same thing with pumpkins. I mean, most Americans don't know that, you know, over 50% of our fresh produce in the United States is actually imported. And many of the fruits and vegetables that we buy, even if we're shopping at a super fancy supermarket and we're buying organic frozen, you know, fruits or vegetables, most people don't realize that a lot of those products come from China. You're buying frozen fruits and vegetables and they're actually imported from China. And no one has to tell you that because of the country of origin labeling. You don't have to put, so in the fresh industry, like if I sell a watermelon to a retailer, I have to say produce of USA or produce of Mexico or produce of wherever. But once food has went through a process, manufacturers don't have to tell you where the fruit has come from. So anyway, we started thinking about, you know, okay, what other commodities can we do? And then I found out, and as the nation's largest producer of fresh pumpkins, I'm like, well, let's do some pumpkin seeds. And then I find out that the majority of all pumpkin seeds come from China. And I'm like, this is terrible. Like, why? Okay, we have to figure this out. I mean, how do we do this and be competitive in a global market? Like, why hasn't someone done this already? You know? So then we started doing, you know, taking the pumpkins, doing seed extraction, and then also all of the leftover pumpkins, you know. So some fields actually need the pumpkin to go back, the organic matter put back in the soil. But then we started making pumpkin powder, pumpkin flour, and all of these different things out of the pumpkins that we were growing. And then we looked at every individual crop that we were growing. And, that's the question that we ask. How do we find the fruit's higher purpose? The visually imperfect, or otherwise known as ugly fruit, how do we find the greater purpose? And then how do we help other growers do the same, other family farms? Because it's also the right thing to do for the farm, because when you're selling low margin commodities, you have to use all that you grow. So it's the right thing for the farm, it's the right thing for the consumer, and it's the right thing for the planet. And then at the end of the day, it also makes me feel better, because the less we waste, the better I feel.
It's a terrific rounding out of the story. And Sarah, I want to sort of end with a bit of advice for our entrepreneurs, because you're talking about sustainability and making sure that you're doing the right thing for the business, but there are so many stories in the book where you make an active effort to make sure that people understand their contribution to the greater whole. And in particular, you're telling from the beginning, women entrepreneurs, that you can do this, you need to do this, there need to be more of us. In fact, your dedication is to the girls who steal thunder and the boys who help them do it. Yeah. And I know you're thinking about this with your two sons as well. Talk to our women entrepreneurs, talk to our historically underrepresented entrepreneurs, and tell them what they ought to be thinking about as they launch a business.
Well, I think that, ultimately, if you I use this term, it's sort of harsh actually, but I'm just going to go ahead. Whatever you do, you have to literally want it more than you want to breathe. And I know that sounds a little excessive, and it doesn't play into the whole work-life balance theme. But you really do. You have to really want it that bad, and it has to be your focus, and you can ultimately do anything. And I think I get asked a lot about being a woman in a very male-dominated industry. But if I'm just being completely candid, I never thought about my gender. When I was a young girl, it's not like I didn't encounter people who underestimated me, or, maybe didn't want to give me a chance or whatever because of my gender. I just didn't pay attention to a lot of that. And I just stayed focused on what I wanted to accomplish. And I never really felt like if someone was standing in my way, and I didn't really let it get in my head. I figured out how to go around, under, over, whatever. And I just really didn't give the fact that I was a girl a whole lot of thought when I was doing what I was doing. Now, maybe some of that was because I was raised by boys and I had been doing, the same things that the boys did for most of my life. But I think sometimes we later in life, than in my mid-20s, I remember thinking, I have to wear a pantsuit, so I'm taken seriously, right? I'm gonna wear a pantsuit to this business meeting. Nobody told me I had to wear a pantsuit. That got in my own head, right? Like I let that sort of get in my own head that, well, maybe people aren't going to take me seriously if I wear a skirt and heels and a blouse. Like, I need to wear a pantsuit. No one told me that I had to do that. Somehow that got in my own head. So I think my advice would be, just stay focused on the mission. If you want it more than you want to breathe, it doesn't matter. Like, nothing is going to get in your way. Gender inequality, none of those things will get in your way as long as you are solely focused. And I think the world has changed so much too. People are more mindful and more aware of diversity and the value of diversity. And it's been really exciting for me to see the world change just in my short time in business, and how diversity is valued, and how, women's voices and their opinions are valued, and more women are getting seats at the table, and it does matter. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that especially retail companies realize, hey, women are the ones that spend the money in our stores. Women are the ones that actually buy our products, and they're spending the household dollars. So why wouldn't we want women in these positions, helping to make these decisions about our company or our brands or these things? For me, in my entire life, it's just made good sense to hire women. People say, well, do you hire a lot of women? I don't hire women because they're women. I hire women because they happen to be the right people for the job. And I sometimes find out that, their insight is what I need, for a particular position or whatever. They just maybe do the job better. But it's not like I go out and say, well, I have a quota of X number of females or X number of minorities that I want to hire. It just so happens to be that, the best people for the job happen to be women more often than not.
Wonderful. Sarah, thank you so much. The book is The Growing Season, How I Saved an American Farm and Built a New Life. I can't recommend this enough. It's a compelling personal story and memoir from an extraordinary entrepreneur. Sarah Frey, thank you for being with us, and I hope everyone will get this book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. Take care and have a great day.
So cool. I love that bit about the joy of seeing the pumpkin truck and how that makes everyone happy.
It's a great book and a great read. And I'm delighted that we can now proceed to a terrific conversation with somebody who probably doesn't need an introduction based on the registrant's comments that we got. Welcome, Guy Raz, to Authors and Innovators. We're so pleased that you're here. And it's we've had a terrific 2 days of conversation around change makers and how the future is now. So we'll go ahead and have our staff unmute you so that we can talk more about how I built this. And I will tell you that Guy, I know that you couldn't be here in person, but I want you to know that New England is just as you left it. Here at the Babson campus, we are enjoying a snowstorm, and we have about an inch of snow on the ground. So wherever it is that you are today, I suspect in the Bay Area or somewhere warmer, it is a much better place than it is here along Route 128, which I know you remember well. Well, Guy, if we can get you to hit mute, unmute yourself.
Unmute. Okay, can you hear me now?
There you go. Perfect. Well,
okay, great.
Welcome. So pleased
you.
to see you, and so happy to talk about how I built this at our 4th annual Authors and Innovators. Guy doesn't need any introduction, but I'll try to do it a little bit of justice for those folks who don't know. Guy Raz is the host, co-creator, and editorial director of 3 NPR programs, including 2 of its most popular ones, the TED Radio Hour and How I Built This. Both shows are heard by more than 14 million people each month. And I know Guy is also the creator and proud co-host of NPR's first ever podcast for kids, Wow in the World. How I Built This, of course, is one of my favorite podcasts. It's about great innovators, entrepreneurs and idealists, and the stories behind the movements they have built. Guy has now taken all of his greatest hits. I think Jennifer Hyman talks about this from the runway in the book and said, you've now turned all of your greatest hits into a how-to manual, and it's a terrific one. Guy, from you, I want to take you back to Brandeis. So you go from Brandeis, you spend some more time getting a degree in history, you spend time as a Nieman Fellow, you then spend time covering wars. How does a guy who's a serious historian and journalist end up being the guy who chronicles business stories?
I have no idea. It's it wasn't a plan. I always wanted to be a journalist. I was a student journalist. I loved journalism and I loved reporting. But what I realized, Larry, early on in my career as a reporter, because I was very, very fortunate early in my career. I started in 1997 at NPR. And by the year 2000, I was the bureau chief in Berlin. I mean, it was kind of a crazy meteoric rise that then then precipitated a meteoric crash later on, but which we can come to. But at a very young age, I was, very lucky, and I was able to be overseas for 6.5 years as a reporter, first with NPR and then with CNN. And I was able to travel and report from 50 countries. I covered 4 wars. I mean, the Iraq War and Afghanistan and Israel-Palestine and wars in the Balkans. But you know what I realized fairly early on in my career was that I was never going to be able to outcompete the best reporters at the kinds of things reporters are rewarded for, which is breaking news and investigative stories. That wasn't really what drove me and what I was passionate about. What I was passionate about was showing up in a village in Iraq and meeting a family and telling their story and giving my listeners a window, into the world of that war through their story. And that is how I reported overseas. That's really how I began to kind of build the style that I have, which is to tell stories and to offer big ideas, advice, inspiration, whatever you want to call it, but through the prism of somebody's own story. And that's so the journey from being a reporter and doing what I do today is actually, even though it would have been surprising had you told me 15 years ago I would be, creating programs around business issues and entrepreneurs, it actually isn't that incongruous when you think about it, because the core, the foundation of my career really began in the form of storytelling. And that's basically what I do today.
And that's how you start the book, which is so compelling. You talk about Stacey Brown from Chicken Salad Chick and how that moved your wife, Hannah, so much that you had that gotcha moment.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about that.
I love Stacey so much. Here's a crazy thing, Larry. As a journalist, you're trained to be distant from the subject that you interview and kind of be the voice of God. And I don't consider myself to be a journalist anymore for a variety of reasons. The reality is when I interview somebody now for how I built this, I am telling their hero's journey, their life story about how they built a brand. And that could be Howard Schultz or Richard Branson or Stacey Brown or Jamie Siminoff of Ring or Sarah Blakely of Spanx, all of whom have been on the show. I interview them for 3, 4, 5 hours sometimes. I just got out of a 5-hour interview yesterday with the founder of Jazzercise, Judy Shepard Missette, an incredible, inspiring woman. She revolutionized aerobics exercise in the U.S. Now, if you interview somebody in an intimate setting for 5 hours and you are asking granular questions about their life and you really are trying to understand it, there's no way you can't walk out of that having developed some kind of bond with that person. And Stacey Brown is an example of that. She was a single mom. Her ex-husband left, and she was on her own with a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. She had not had any work experience because she stayed at home with the kids. She was a graduate of Auburn University. She was living in Auburn, Alabama, and she needed to make money. And she started to make and sell chicken salad to teachers at teachers' lounges, PTA meetings, door to door from an ice chest. And at a certain point, a friend of hers said, "This chicken salad's terrific. Why don't I help you open a little shack? And we can maybe make a luncheonette." And then the rent was like $500 a month. And I don't want to give away the whole story because you can hear it on how I built this, or you can read about it in the book. But it is a story of extraordinary, extraordinary triumph and extraordinary loss and devastating sadness and personal tragedy, but also, an amazing, today that business is a $100 million business. It's called Chicken Salad Chick. It's one of the fastest growing fast casual chains in the South. And it all began out of an ice chest from a woman who had no experience in business and was left with nothing. And it's an incredible story. And I encounter these stories again and again and again. Every single week we put out an episode of how I built this.
And you can feel your passion for these folks. And I liked that you started in the book with the premise that, look, entrepreneurship is not natural. And you answered the basic question that so many of our viewers, more than 300 of them today, Guy, are asking, where do I find good ideas? You talk about so many good ideas in the book. Where do I find a good idea?
Yeah. And let me clarify this idea, because I think it's an important point you make about entrepreneurship not being natural. The natural state of humans is to avoid risk, is to avoid danger, right? That's why we are here on this planet, because we saw the saber-toothed tiger and we went the opposite direction. And starting a business is like charging the saber-toothed tiger. I mean, you are basically saying, okay, I'm going to deal with rejection, the possibility of failure, maybe financial collapse and catastrophe, all the things that we're wired not to do as humans. So becoming an entrepreneur takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. And I have come to the belief and the realization over the last 5 years of really diving into the world of entrepreneurship and studying entrepreneurs, and realizing that it is something that is learned. These are a series of traits and skills that we all have the capacity to learn. Now, to your question, when it comes to ideas and finding good ideas, look, in some ways, this is the easiest part about starting a business. You have an idea. It's exciting. You talk about it with everybody you know. You imagine your product on the shelves of Walmart. But then comes the hard part. You got to have a business plan. You've got to find investors. You got to find out what factories you can produce this product in. You've got to figure out a marketing and distribution strategy. I mean, it's very complex and a series of problems to be solved, which is what makes starting a business so exciting. But how do people come up with ideas? The answer is fairly simple. I mean, not coming up with a good idea is not easy, but the concept of it is relatively simple. It is trying to identify a problem out in the world that you have, that you need to solve, that will solve it for yourself and for lots of other people. So if it's a problem that just you have, you remember the movie The Jerk with Steve Martin?
Oh, sure.
He solved the problem that he had, which was, he pulled off the glasses. I can't remember what it was called, with that little, but not a problem most people have. Most people are perfectly happy doing that with their glasses. You need to solve a problem that you have and lots of other people have, and or improve on a service or a product that's out there that can be made better. And that's essentially what a business is. And, for many of the people I've interviewed, it comes in sort of moments of searching, a great example is the story of Away suitcases. Jen Rubio, who is a wonderful entrepreneur, brilliant entrepreneur, was working for a jeans company and in the UK as a marketing person. And she was really searching for a business idea. She really wanted to start a business. She had worked for Warby Parker as a social media director, so she was already immersed in that world. And she was on a trip in Europe and in the airport and carrying her suitcase with her, and it began to break apart. And that was her aha moment. When she got back to New York, she started going to TJ Maxx and Marshalls and all of these stores, looking at suitcases, buying them, examining them, starting to research the industry. And she realized that in the suitcase market, there were your standard suitcases that everyone buys at TJ Maxx or Target. And then there are the super high-end Tumi and Louis Vuitton bags that are so expensive, they're inaccessible. But there was no really well-made sort of moderate to high-end bag that was reasonably priced, that was within reach. And that was the genesis of what became Away suitcases, which was, last year valued at $1 billion. So that's really how it happens. It's about keeping your eyes open and looking out for problems in the world that need to be solved.
And you've got to be a bit of an optimist. You talked a bit about rational optimism in your recent conversation with the folks from Life is Good. How would you think about that? What would you say to our viewers today who say, gee, the world has changed. Should I still do this?
Larry, optimism is a really, really complex idea, right? Because we don't want to be naive. We're living in a very difficult time right now. We're a week away from an election that I think a lot of us have anxiety over and about what's going to happen in the days and weeks afterwards. We're living at a time where a significant percentage of the American population, believes that the other side is socialist or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's a very, very scary time. What I mean by optimism, and I'm inspired by the Jacobs brothers, the founders of Life is Good, this idea of rational optimism, which means it's not that you can't be skeptical of things. It's not that you can't be suspicious of things or that you can't be worried about things, but it's that you have to essentially accept that that any kind of pursuit, any kind of idea that's worth putting out into the world, is, if it's worth doing, it will take time, and you have to see far out. It's like it's a cliche, but everything is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And when it comes to the idea of optimism, yes, entrepreneurs are optimistic about their ideas, but it doesn't mean that they don't have moments of self-doubt. It doesn't mean that they don't have moments of lying on the bathroom floor crying about whether this thing is going to work or whether they can make payroll. I mean, that's also an important part of the process. You have to interrogate your idea. You have to interrogate your own assumptions all the time. It's really important. But ultimately, when you believe that the idea that you have is an idea that the world needs, that can be a really powerful force. I mean, I think about Tristan Walker and Bevel Razors. He's an African-American man. He knew that, the moment he started to shave, that he would get painful razor bumps on his skin. And that's because men, mainly brown and black men and men with very curly hair, when you shave, the hair grows right back into your skin. And he wanted to create a razor that would solve this problem for men of color. And he went to investors, and most of those investors were white, and they were sympathetic, but they didn't see this as a problem. They couldn't see it. They couldn't understand how this was a problem. But Tristan Walker knew. He knew there were tens of millions of men and women around the world who had this problem, who needed this problem to be solved. And it didn't matter that he heard 100 no's or 1,000 no's. He kept moving forward because he knew intuitively that if he couldn't solve that problem, nobody could. But he knew it was a problem that had to be solved, and that's what made him optimistic. That's what kept him moving forward.
Rational optimism. Guy, I'm getting bombarded from our viewers. I'm gonna read you some questions. I'm going to take 3 in particular, and you should know, Guy, that each of these folks will be receiving a signed copy of How I Built This.
Wow.
So
awesome.
Our first question comes from Ashley Lucas from Babson College. Guy, the majority of entrepreneurs in the world will not grow their companies to be $100 million businesses. How do we communicate to individuals that building impactful startups, which may never make it big, is just as meaningful as building the ones that do?
I love that question. Ashley, I want you to amplify that idea from the rafters, from the rooftops. It's so important. Look, How I Built This is it's a realistic look at what it's like to build a business. But of course, we focus on huge companies, Starbucks and Ring and Virgin and Impossible Foods and Airbnb and Slack. Why do we do that? Because we're also a business and we want people to listen to the shows. And if it was a show that focused on a really great local grocery store, our audience would be much smaller, and it would be harder to have a scaled show with which could be a sustainable business and could employ lots of people and do what we do. That being said, every time I have an opportunity to say this, I say it. The corner grocery store in your community that is profitable is a better business than Uber, which has never made a dime. Okay. Right. Many of these startups and unicorns have never made any money, have never turned a profit. I think that attitude is starting to change now, especially in the VC world, where VCs are starting to say, you know what, maybe this approach wasn't right. Maybe we need to start focusing on companies that are profitable. Dropbox is a great example. It was profitable from day one. And there are lots of other consumer products. Jazzercise. I just interviewed, I've interviewed the founder of Jazzercise. They were profitable from day one. And they were lean and mean. And so I think that the idea of success isn't, a successful business isn't a massive scaled $100 million, billion-dollar company. It's a company that is sustainable, that can sustain a person's life, can give you fulfillment, can maybe employ 1 or 2 other people and give them sustainable lives. My dad ran a very successful business. When he was 42 years old, he opened up a jewelry store selling pearls. He had no experience in this. He was an engineer. He had worked for defense contractors in Southern California, but he wanted to be his own boss, and he decided to start selling pearls. Now, did he become a millionaire? No, he never made him rich, but he was able to raise 4 kids. He was able to employ 7 people over the 35 years that he was in business. He closed it down. He didn't sell it to anybody. He didn't make it was no payday at the end. He was left with merchandise that he had to liquidate, but he's retired. He was able to have a great life and raise 4 kids. And that is, to me, that is the definition of a successful enterprise.
Isn't that true? And this book is for them too.
It's exactly for them. That's exactly who it's for.
Our next question comes from Michael Welts, who's the CMO at Wasabi. And Michael asks, Guy, in 1899, the commissioner of the U.S. Patent Office said, quote, "Everything that can be invented has been invented." What do you think your guests would say about this prediction 120 years later?
I love that so much. It's so cool. I mean, can you imagine 20 years ago, 15 years ago, if someone said to you, we're all going to be walking through airports like this,
right?
Or we're going to be walking down the street like this. I mean, I would not have been happy about that. I'm not happy about it. But the point is that we could not have imagined how smartphones, the iPhone in particular, has changed the way we behave, we have now a portal to infinite knowledge, right, at our fingertips. You look at right now at the pandemic, right, this past year, and you look at what kinds of opportunities will come out of this moment. I mean, we can only begin to imagine. We can start to see the contours of that future, right? Think about a brand like Zoom, which, by the way, its stock price went from like $20 to $600 this year. So, woe is me for not putting $10 into that company. But, Zoom is to the pandemic. I mean, Zoom is to communication today what I think CompuServe and Prodigy were to the early internet. Now, it's good. It's just not good enough. It's not immersive enough. There are so many opportunities now to completely revolutionize hybrid and also distant virtual communications, because that is going to be the future. It doesn't mean we're not going to gather again. We have to gather. We are social animals. We need to be together. But what it means is that the future will be a lot more hybridization, especially as more people now realize they don't have to live in San Francisco or New York or Boston, expensive cities. They can live in Boise, Idaho, or Omaha, Nebraska, or Charlestown, West Virginia, which, by the way, will be really good for America to get that, to revert brain drain, to get smart people into these cities where they left for so long. So I think that we're going to see incredible innovation come out of this pandemic. How do we interact? How do we communicate? Even you look at the real estate industry. I mean, it's been booming this year, which is shocking, right? You would not have thought that would happen. A lot of sales are happening through virtual tours. The real estate industry has really pioneered the virtual home tour that has made it immersive and really allows you to feel what it's like to be in that home. So I think there's so many opportunities in the travel and leisure industry, which have been really hit hard. What is travel going to look like in the future? And these are very small incremental innovations I'm talking about. We can't even begin to imagine what's going to happen with nanotechnology. What's going to come out of biotech. I mean, the Nobel Prize winner, Jennifer Doudna, who won it for CRISPR technology, we, in 100 years, we might be looking back at cancer and in the same way that we now look at, bloodletting and leeches, right? Or giving somebody a swig of whiskey during the Civil War and amputating their leg, right? So that idea, of course, is a wonderful quote, but of course it's totally absurd, right? I mean, what will happen in the next 100 years will blow our minds if we could have that crystal ball today.
Guy, Mary Bellezza asks, Guy, what was the single most important piece of advice that you received and followed that was critical to your success?
It's a great question. I received so much advice during my time. I think the most important piece of advice that I have received and have really followed is listen. My superpower is not my intelligence. I'm not more intelligent than you. I'm not, more connected. I'm just very curious, and that's a choice that we can all make. I think curiosity is much more important than intelligence, because if you're curious, your mind is open and you're willing to learn from everybody you meet. And that's actually a piece of advice I got early on, which was, and I'm sure you've heard a version of this, which is surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. And every person you encounter is an opportunity to learn, is an opportunity to grow. And I am who I am today because of the people I met in college and and after that and before that, and my wife, and all these inputs, all these brilliant people. The music I listen to today, heavily influenced by people I met in college, the ideas in my mind. So that's one of them. The other thing is listening. Listening is a superpower that we all have the capacity to develop. Most of us spend too much of our time talking, but listening to somebody is honoring them. And it can be one of the most powerful ways to develop a relationship, to convince somebody if you're having a debate, just by listening, by acknowledging their ideas, by actively listening, and by asking questions, based on the things that they're telling you. That's what I do and how I built this. And that is why I'm able to get people to really open up, because really all I'm doing is using my emotional energy to listen to them. And that's been really valuable in my career.
I want to talk a bit more about that, and have you talk about the active listening and authentic listening that you do, because I think it's one of the reasons so many of us listen to the podcast. I've read, and I think I listened to you tell Tim Ferriss on a podcast, that when people come on or agree to come on How I Built This, you say to them, I'm going to be, are you willing to answer anything? Are you willing to, quote, surrender? And have you had folks who agree to that and then say, I'm not sure I can do this?
Well, I'm very careful at being very explicit in what I mean when I have a phone call with them. I want them to say no at that point. And because these are always off the record conversations. I'm not going to tell you the people who have not agreed to come on the show. It's not many, but we part as friends. I'm not there to embarrass them. I want them to understand that how I built this and their story will not land in the same way, will not have the same emotional resonance and impact if it's if they're plugging something, or if it's a polished publicity event. It has to be real. It has to be authentic. The reason why, Larry, you listen to the show and I listen to the show, because I'm a listener too, is because I don't want to hear Howard Schultz talk about the success of Starbucks. I want to hear him talk about his personal anguish. I want to hear him talk about his dad and his dad's, alcoholism. And I want to hear people talk about moments when they felt alone and abandoned. And because that's when we connect with them. That's when we say, holy smokes, like I am like Howard Schultz or Sarah Blakely or Tristan Walker. They're like me. I the person who invented Ring, Airbnb, Uber, not Uber, Lyft, they have vulnerabilities too. And so that's very important. I need that person to come onto the show willing to take us into their internal dialogue or monologue. We're all, we all live in our own movies. You live in your movie, I live in mine, all of you watching live in yours. That's consciousness. We walk around, we look left and right. It's our story, right? It's our point of view. What I'm trying to do on the show is get a seat in the cockpit of that person's brain, kind of like in Star Wars, or Star Trek, and bring you along with me. You're in the passenger seat with me, all 3.5 million of you, really, you are. And we're trying to see your story and your flaws too, because your flaws are part of what make you you. No one is perfect. And the whole point of How I Built This is to show that these people that are so successful and have done so well in business are just like you. They're imperfect, they're flawed, they made a lot of mistakes, a lot of stupid mistakes, but they worked really hard and they got really lucky and they persevered.
And you're telling their story, which is so much better than simply lecturing. And that's what I like so much about How I Built This. So what is next? Is there a person or is there an industry that you say, I got to dig into that? I haven't quite done that show yet. What's next, Guy?
Yeah, I mean, one of the industries that we really have not done is gaming. In part because, look, Larry, I'm 45. I'm not a gamer. I played Nintendo when I was a kid, but it was never my thing. My kids are obsessed with it. My kids drive me crazy. And we have a lot of debates about screen time. And debates is polite. Arguments, drag down fights. But my kids love games. And gaming is a huge industry. You know, it's kind of passed me by. And I have really neglected that. So we are actually going to do an episode about a company that is a major force in gaming called Riot Games. They invented League of Legends. There are really 3 video games that have revolutionized gaming in the last 20 years. It's World of Warcraft, League of Legends, and Fortnite. And those are 3 different companies. So we are profiling the founders of Riot Games to really kind of delve into that world. And I admit in the interview, you'll hear it when the podcast comes out in a couple months, that I'm going to ask questions that make me sound like a complete idiot. But these guys were so patient with me and explained the intricacies and the details. It's a very complex industry. It requires a lot of startup capital, but a really interesting industry and a really interesting story with those guys. So gaming is certainly one area that we will start to look at. But rest assured, if you're not into games, it's not going to be all games all the time. We're going to, we're going to sprinkle it in every now and again.
Guy, who do you want to read this?
I don't want people who only are thinking about starting a business or only starting a business. I want this book to be read by anybody who wants to learn how to think entrepreneurially, because I don't believe you have to hang a shingle out in front of your door to be an entrepreneur. You can work at Babson College and be entrepreneurial. You can work at Disney. You can work at NPR. Apple computers. Apple computers. Johnny Ive invented the iPhone inside of Apple. Who's going to say he's not entrepreneurial? It's a mindset. And I want this book in some ways is inspired by Carol Dweck's book, Mindset. I want people to think about entrepreneurship as a mindset, as a way of thinking, and a sequence of tools that you can pull out from your brain toolbox to make you more effective, to make you a better collaborator, colleague, to think more creatively, to solve problems, whether you're working inside a big organization or you're doing it on your own. This book is really designed to be a cheerleader and the kind of book that you can pick up, especially when you're feeling down, when you're feeling beaten down, and you can open it up and you can say, okay, I got this.
Well, as I said in the Boston Business Journal, I got it and read it in one sitting. It's everything and more. Guy Raz, thank you so much. The book is How I Built This, The Unexpected Paths to Success from the World's Most Inspiring Entrepreneurs. Please get it from your independent bookseller, our sponsor, Wellesley Books. And Guy, thank you so much. We'll look forward to seeing you and hearing you on How I Built This in the future.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you so much.
It was fun. So great to listen to Guy. Of course, I loved his conversation about the entrepreneurial mindset. That is exactly how we teach entrepreneurship at Babson, that it is a mindset. It can be taught. And it is a set of ways of thinking about solving problems. So dead on right there for what we do at Babson. So I love to hear that. And I think we heard a lot of really good lessons kind of across the board, Larry, right? About entrepreneurship and about being entrepreneurial, things about understanding what gives you joy, the power of listening, learning from failure. All those are the threads that we heard over the past 2 days that I think are all just really relevant to anybody starting anything or doing anything or having a new idea in any situation. So it's just really neat to see how it all came together after listening to all these phenomenal authors and innovators.
You're so right, Debbie. I want to thank all of our sponsors. I want to thank our Brown & Brown, The Buzz, Innovation Women, Boston Business Journal, Boston Inno. I want to thank all of our authors who spent so much time with us talking about their books. I hope all of you can get these books and learn from them as we go forward. Next year, we hope, Debbie and I hope that we will be hosting you live. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you so much. If you have ideas, if you have book suggestions, please visit authorsinnovators.org. We do want to hear from you, and we really, really hope you enjoyed this 2 days of ideas, innovation, and innovators. Please join us again next time. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the rest of your snowy day.
Thanks, everyone.